All members of the committee are present, and you can begin when you wish.
Thank you very much, City Clerk, and welcome everyone, members of the Audit Committee, to our Audit Committee meeting of May 4th. And I would like to start off with the call to order and a roll call, and I'll hand it over to the City Clerk to do the roll call.
Members of committee, I will call your name. Please indicate your presence. Councillor Santos.
Present.
Councillor Willens.
Present.
Councillor Paleshi.
Present.
Councillor Bowman.
Present.
Councillor Singh.
Present.
Councillor Dillon.
Present.
Member Ali.
Present.
Member Jane.
Present.
Member Zaman.
Present.
And Chair Medeiros is present. All members are present, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Our next item is approval of the agenda. Do any councillors or do any members of the Audit Committee have any additional business that they would like to add? And they can add it on the chat function on the WebEx. I don't see anyone, so I have a motion moved by Councillor Willens to approve the agenda, that the agenda for the Audit Committee meeting of May 4th, 2021 be approved as published and circulated. Is there anyone opposed to this motion? Otherwise, your vote will count in the affirmative. Okay, no objections. Declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Do any members have a declaration of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act for any matter to be considered on today's agenda? Seeing none, the clerk will so note for the meeting minutes. Our next item is consent. Committee, as part of our new consent motion process, I will read each agenda item that is subject to the consent motion, and any member may verbally identify the item to be held for debate during the meeting. Any item not held for debate will be considered as part of the consent motion and voted on for approval. Any of the following agenda items will not be subject to the consent motion for approval: delegations, presentations, added new business, member discussion items, public question period. I'll start reading the relevant agenda items, and members can identify any items to be held for debate. Item 6.1, staff report regarding annual report 2020.
Hold, please. I have hold it.
Okay, it's held. Item 6.2, staff report regarding corporate fraud prevention hotline.
Hold, my mom.
Okay, that's held as well?
Yes.
Okay. Item 6.3, status of management action plans, March 31st, 2021. I'll hold it. Item 6.4, staff report regarding whistleblower information report.
Hold, Councillor Singh.
Councillor Singh. Item 6.5, staff report regarding HR employee benefits audit. I'll hold that. And I'll pass it over. Essentially, Clerk, everything's been held. So I'll hand it over to you.
Mr. Chair, I'll just recap who's held each item. For item 6.1, staff report regarding annual report 2020, Councillor Bowman has held that. Item 6.2, a staff report, the corporate fraud prevention hotline update. Member Ali has held that item. Item 6.3, status of management action plans. Chair Medeiros has held that item. Item 6.4, staff report, whistleblower information. Councillor Singh has held that item. And item 6.5, Chair Medeiros has held that item regarding HR employee benefits audit. So since all items have been held, Mr. Chair, there is no necessity for a consent motion vote.
Okay, thank you. So we'll now go on to presentation delegation, and our first one is from Kevin Travers, lead audit engagement partner, KPMG LLP, 2020 audited consolidated financial statements for the city of Brampton. We also, just as a reminder to members of the committee, we also have a related staff report, item 7.1, which can be brought forward and consider after receiving the delegation. Welcome, Kevin.
Good morning. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to speak to the audit findings report. So this is our findings report issued. It's the second of two formal communications with this committee. The first was our audit planning report that we presented to you a few months back relative to our work concerning the external financial statements, consolidated financial statements of the city of Brampton for the year ended December 31st, 2020. I'm going to be speaking to the material that I believe begins on page 136 within the agenda package itself. I'm going to speak to the highlights of the document rather than do it page by page by page. But if a member of the clerk's team is able to move the material to page 136 or our presentation to start, that would be great.
It'll just come up momentarily, Kevin.
Okay, thanks. Great, thank you. So if you can scroll, yes, through another page. I am joined today but also by Maria Kushner, who's also on the line. I will speak to the highlights of this document itself, and if members of the committee have questions following the formal part of our presentation, we'd be happy to respond to those questions. If we can remove next 2 slides from there to the executive summary. Thanks. So we have completed our work. We will be issuing an unqualified or clean audit opinion for the consolidated financial statements for the City of Brampton for the year ended December 31st, 2020. Our audit was conducted in accordance with the audit plan that we presented. We did update the actual revenue items for the year such that our final materiality, increased slightly from what was presented to this committee when we presented our audit plan itself. The only items that are outstanding at this point in time are the items that you'd expect to be outstanding, and that's ultimately completing our conversations with this committee today, ultimately understanding that the financial statements have been approved by council. At that point in time, we receive what's our signed representation letter from management, and we'll issue the unqualified audit opinion that I mentioned earlier. With respect to the audit itself, from a highlight standpoint, there were no audit differences noted, whether they're corrected or uncorrected. Had we encountered any difference or error within the financial statement reporting process, we would have brought those to your attention today. We can move forward a couple of slides, please. Thanks. So this has been a year like no other, of course. In dealing in terms of what's new in 2020, the most significant item from a financial reporting standpoint deals with the impact of the pandemic. As auditors, this has an impact on us in a couple of ways. The first is to consider the impact on the organization that we're auditing. So that is to say, within the financial statements, are there captions, are there disclosures that have been impacted by the results of the pandemic? Should we be reconsidering materiality levels as a result of the pandemic? So items that are within the financial statement purview specifically. And then other items such as how do we perform our audit remotely? How do we share data with management remotely? Has there been an impact on management's control process as a result of having to perform certain reviews and authorizations remotely as well? Within these next 2 slides, you'll see comments on how we dealt with those items. There are certain items within the financial statements you'll see that have been directly impacted. From a disclosure standpoint, there is a note, there are commentary with respect to the fact that it has had a far-reaching impact on the City of Brampton and will continue to, but at this point in time, the ultimate impact from a financial reporting standpoint is unknown. There is also, and you'll see a slide later in this presentation with respect to, there has been funding received under the Safe Restart Agreement. Part of our audit work was to ensure that that funding has been recognized in the appropriate period. With respect to performing our work remotely, we were able to share our data with management. We had a number of different meetings and touch points to ensure that we had the information we needed as needed, and it has not impacted the timing of the audit work or the conclusions from that standpoint, nor was there any significant impact on our work in having to look at different means of authorizations to the extent that they existed. We can move forward a couple of slides, please. Yeah, the other item that was new in the current period was the fact that there was, I'll go one more slide, please. Sorry. That there was a new audit standard that was required to be adopted in the current period dealing with the audit of significant accounting estimates. This was primarily a documentation standard for us. It didn't change a lot from our audit other than to require us to have a more granular level of understanding of the significant estimates and the assumptions that go into those significant estimates for financial reporting processes. So it required us to have very detailed understanding and documentation within our audit files with respect to the significant estimates. And you'll note that within the rest of the deck, where there are significant items that had estimates attached to them, we've identified those estimates. We can go to the next slide, please. So starting with estimates, within the financial statements, the organization has employer future benefit liabilities that are recorded. And to the extent that those are recorded on the balance sheet and require management to make estimates, they've also engaged an actuary to assist in the determination of what that estimated liability will be. There is disclosure within the financial statements as to those amounts as well as the significant estimates. We are required to perform audit work as to the attributes, excuse me. So to the extent that the data that the city provides to their actuary in order to determine that estimate, we've audited those amounts back to the actual employee records, and again, found no issues there. We also compared the significant assumptions. So with respect to discount rate, trend rates on cost, we compared those to other similar municipalities to ensure that the assumptions are appropriate and consistent with other organizations, and found no issues. You move to the next slide, please. So with respect to revenue, this slide speaks to the significant revenue items, the work that we performed, including ensuring that items have been appropriately recognized in the period to which they pertain. That also includes the recognition of deferred revenues, including obligatory reserve funds. So that would include development charges. So ensuring that those have been recognized in the appropriate period as revenue. Again, no issues were noted based upon the audit work that we performed. We can move to the next slide, please. So this slide speaks to the work that we perform on the contingent liability side. So that would include claims and threatened claims against the city. So in order for something to be presented as a liability within your financial statements, a claim would have to come against the city for which there was a more likely than not exposure, and for which you could reasonably estimate what that exposure would be. So working with the in-house city council on that, we correspond back with city council, and we're comfortable that any amounts that have been recorded appropriately within the financial statements. We can move to the next slide. This slide speaks to the uncorrected differences and corrected adjustments. As I noted when we presented the executive summary of this presentation, there were no differences noted during the course of the audit itself. Go to the next slide, please. So the appendices within our presentation today we'll take as read. The comments I'll make with respect to the appendices is there's reference to future accounting standards that will be adopted. So if you go forward another couple slides, please. The current developments. Thanks. So the Public Sector Accounting Standard Board pushed out by a year the implementation date of all new accounting standards. So everything's pushed back a year from where it had been originally required from an adoption standpoint. So the most significant item coming for the city deals with asset retirement obligations, and that won't be required to be adopted by the city until their fiscal 2023 year. We'll continue to work with management to ensure that they're in a position to adopt these standards and that they're without any issue, as we have done in the past. So that's really the formal point or part of our presentation this morning. I would like to thank the city's finance team for their assistance in getting this work done in a remote fashion, and certainly on time, and you can see a very clean audit without any audit differences noted.
Okay, thank you very much. I do see questions from members of committee. I do remind those that if you do want to ask a question or comment, please use the chat function on the chat box to the right of your screen. Councillor Santos.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, thank you very much, Kevin, for the presentation. Given a lot of the challenges we had in 2020, would you could you comment again on how you think this audit went and what the sort of financial status is based on your audit right now? Because it sounds like this is a bit of a good news audit in that you haven't really made any recommendations on what to improve or have any significant findings. If you could comment on that, Kevin, that would be great.
Yes, thank you. So what you'll note is that we were able to perform the audit itself remotely, and this is through you, Mr. Chair. So we were able to perform the audit remotely. We had access to all the information we needed to support the amounts that were in the financial statements. So the fact that we performed this audit remotely didn't impact that. In terms of making observations for improvement within financial reporting, in previous year we have noted observations for improvement where we've encountered items. That's a byproduct of the work we perform, of course, as our objective is to provide an audit opinion on the financial statements. In the current period, as you'll note, there were no audit differences, so the material that was provided to us is the same material that populated the financial statements taken as a whole. The only recommendations were made during the course of the audit itself were with respect to disclosures in the financial statements, and typically we wouldn't report those as being observations for improvement per se. But certainly we had access to everything that we needed, and we didn't find any issues with respect to that material.
So based on your audit this year, did you find any significant issues related to this audit? It sounds like the recommendations that you put forward from the last audit were done. Any other red flags with respect to the audit from last year? Like I think it's great. I think that the fact that this is a clean audit is actually really good news for us at the City of Brampton.
Through the chair, I don't have red flags to raise at all from a financial reporting standpoint, and staff has prepared their report with respect to the actual results from a financial standpoint. So I don't have comments specific to the financial results over and above what staff has performed there. But had we had anything to bring forward in terms of any specific issues, we would have done so in this report. So based on this financial audit, you would, like, I think I heard you, and I'll quote you on this. You said this is a clean audit. Is that correct? Through the chair, yes, that's correct. Okay, thank you very much. This is a really good news story for us. I think all things considered, all the challenges we faced in 2020, it's good to hear that the City of Brampton had a clean audit according to our third-party auditor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Bowman.
Thank you very much through you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question, Kevin, on the audit report schedule A 2020, municipal surplus reconciliation. Does that reconciliation include amounts that were from each department for gapping funds, which were funds that were not spent on personnel because several people took the opportunity to do several jobs at one time? Where would I find the information on the gapping funds? Through the chair, thanks for that question. I believe that's a question more appropriately directed towards management. Schedule A, the Schedule A isn't our specific schedule. That's a reconciling schedule that management has prepared. Okay, is there anyone from finance here today? Mark?
Through the chair, hi, Councillor Bowman. Yes, I'll ask Zishan Majid to step in.
Thanks, Mark. Councillor Bowman, do you mind just repeating the question through the chair?
Sure, Z. I just wondered, when we have gapping funds that are available for personnel, managers, directors, commissioners that are not hired in each of the divisions, those gapping funds, where would I find those reported? And if the gapping funds were spent elsewhere, where would I find that reported?
Through the chair, Councillor, I think it is included in the total surplus before consolidation number. Again, this is just actual numbers that we're including. In terms of a specific line item, I'll have to just confirm with our accounting team. Maya, I don't know if you're on, maybe we can confirm, but the number is inclusive of actual gapping funds that were realized during 2020.
Okay, thank you.
Just to confirm, sorry, through the chair to Councillor Bowman, that is correct. Any gapping funds would be included in the overall city surplus, and that individual lines would show into the specific departmental lines on the financial statement of operations.
Okay, Maja, would those be shown as specific gapping funds, or would those be shown as something else and called something else?
Through the chair to Councillor Bowman, on the actual operating statements for each cost center, they would show as a separate line. Okay, thank you. Last question,
Kevin, the audit that you do, the audit, when a firm or anybody gets audited, you guys base your audit on the numbers that are presented to ensure that those numbers that are there are in the right place, that they're not misrepresented, that they add up correctly, and basically that, you know, that everything they've put there is in good order, correct?
Through the chair, that's correct, in all material respects.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So I don't see any further questions. So I do have a motion moved by Councillor Santos to receive the delegation and approve the staff report. I'll bring the staff report. Do anyone have any questions on staff report 7.1? No? Okay. So I do have a motion again moved by Councillor Santos to receive the delegation and approve the staff report that the delegation from Kevin Travers, lead audit engagement partner, KPMG LLP, regarding 2020 audited consolidated financial statements for the City of Brampton to the Audit Committee meeting of May 4, 2021 be received, that the report titled 2020 audited consolidated financial statements for the City of Brampton to the Audit Committee meeting of May 4th, 2021 be received, and that the 2020 audited consolidated financial statements for the City of Brampton be approved. Are there any objections? Does anyone oppose? No, so the motion carries. So our next item now is item 6.1 regarding annual report 2020. Do any members have any questions about the report? And so
Mr.
we
Chair,
are.
Councillor Bowman had held this item.
Yeah, so I'll hand it over to Councillor Bowman. Councillor Bowman, go ahead.
Yeah, again, just very quickly, the annual report says there were 3 new members of the Audit Committee. Who were those new members?
Sorry for the delay.
Yep.
I didn't record that information before coming in, but I'll get that information to you and I'll send it out to you. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem. Right at the beginning of the report says there were 3 new members of the audit team, so I just wondered who they were.
Oh, the audit team. I'm sorry. Yes, the Brad Cecil, Nabal Matar, and Gurpreet Singh.
Okay, because surprisingly we don't hear about new additions. The audit committee doesn't get to welcome them or anything. So it'd be nice if we knew when those additions were there. In case the audit committee would like to meet them or talk to them, and so that's okay. And it mentions that the head of audit was changed. And was there a particular reason why the head of audit was changed, or was that filling a vacancy?
Going into 2020, we had a acting director, and the permanent director or a contract director was hired in February of 2020.
Okay, thanks, Richard.
Okay, thank you. Now I go to member Ali.
Thank you, Chair. And this is not a question, I have a comment to make on item 6.1, the staff report 2020. It talks about the independence and the objectivity, and it further states that the independence is the freedom from conditions that threaten the ability of internal audit to carry out the responsibilities in an unbiased manner. So my statement is that with the function reporting to the CAO, I feel that the independence is being overly compromised. Even though we have a fact that we have a revised audit charter approved by committee in September last year, but still the statement is that the independence is overly compromised, particularly because the CAO and the audit committee approve the audit charter work plan, and which I understand that it goes to the CAO for approval first before it comes to the audit committee. So therefore, I feel that overall internal audit function is overly compromised, and the independence is also being compromised. That's my statement that I want to put it on record.
Okay, thank you very much. And I guess to City Clerk, I guess just regarding that comment, if we required, and I think we had a discussion last week, and for example, someone like myself was on the winning side for approving the charter. If I wanted to reopen the charter, would it be at this moment, at this committee, or would we leave that for Committee of Council?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if there is a suggestion to reconsider a council decision, that can only occur at City Council. So that could be a consideration tomorrow. A subordinate committee or a standing committee of the council, like the Audit Committee, cannot reopen a council decision. Only council can do that. And there is a procedural process to follow, whether it's a notice of motion or if it is a matter to be introduced tomorrow, it would require some waiving of the procedure bylaw to undertake that process.
Okay, thank you very much, City Clerk. Member Ali, are you satisfied then with the City Clerk in terms of guidance, which has in terms of process for us to reopen it?
So, to Chair, do we have to put a motion to reopen at the council, on the council decision? Is that how it works?
Yeah, my understanding from the City Clerk, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that because the decision was ratified at council, it's up to council to reconsider it. I'm not sure, City Clerk, in terms of you can provide guidance. If Member Ali wanted to put a motion of recommendation urging council to reopen that to reinforce independence of the Audit Committee, is that a proper motion by Member Ali?
Through you, Mr. Chair, my advice to yourself and the committee is that would not be a proper motion. A reconsideration can only occur at City Council as the final decision-making authority. To do otherwise, to allow committees to put motions forward to ask council to reconsider, is essentially committees second-guessing council's decision, and only council can second-guess its decision by a reconsideration.
Okay, so duly noted. Thank you. Is that a good explanation, Member Ali, or any further clarification?
So, to the Chair, I'm not the member of the council, so if this needs to be open, so any other councillor can put a motion to reopen the council decision?
Yes, that's what the City Clerk, yeah.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, yes. A member of council can bring a motion to City Council, to a City Council meeting to reopen the item. And there would have to be a precondition, somebody on the prevailing side, but that is an action that is reserved for a member of council to do at a City Council meeting. So it is possible if council wishes to do that. But it cannot happen at a committee like the Audit Committee today.
Okay. Thanks, Peter, and thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Member Ali. Councillor Dillon.
Sorry, Chair Medeiros, are we on 6.1 right now?
Yes, that's correct.
Sorry, I just had to step away for a second. It's a quick question. It says that there's 28 complaints were referred to a third-party investigation. I'm just wondering where the report is, when and who completed the investigation, and who received the investigation report. I don't believe the Audit Committee was informed about the investigation.
So to the acting internal auditor, do you want to respond?
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, thank you. The complaints were excuse me. Human Resources made an employment lawyer, which internal audit engaged with. All the relevant information was sent to the assessor. They provided a report back to Human Resources with their assessment. No investigation was conducted. They did provide recommendations to Human Resources. In terms of any reports that would come back in regards to the hotline, those are not usually made public or shared.
Sorry, did you say there was no investigation?
The cases were assessed, but there was no investigation. That didn't. But they did provide additional recommendations to Human Resources.
Because it says it was referred to a third-party investigator, and the reports are now closed.
Right. So it was probably that wording is probably not clear. It's referred to a third party. They assessed the all the relevant information, and they advised us that there was no grounds to proceed with an investigation. However, but they did provide guidance to HR on the issue.
Right, but I'm just wondering, should not have audit committee be informed of this?
The process indicates, and process doesn't indicate that this would go to audit committee.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Singh. Councillor Dillon, sorry, Councillor Singh.
Yeah, I just I had a lot of questions about 8.1, which are similar to what Mr. Ali was asking. 8.1 talks about reporting between the CAO for internal audit and all that. So I'm hoping to have a robust conversation, but thinking that it's more closely aligned to 8.1. I will actually reserve my comments because I have a lot of questions, especially around the benchmark. So, because 8.1 goes into a lot of the concerns raised by Member Ali as well.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Singh. Councillor Zaman, Member Zaman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is just a question for the internal audit executive, just to follow up on the comments that he made just right now about the 28 hotline reports that were closed. So if I'm understanding it correctly, these reports that came in were parceled off to third-party assessors. I guess my question is, who were those third-party assessors? Were they independent parties? Were they in-house parties? Who assessed these reports?
They were independent.
And the conclusion. Okay.
They were an independent employment legal firm, a legal firm that specializes in employment law.
Okay, so they were arm's length parties. That's the only question I have. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member Ali.
Thank you, Chair. In the audit report or the staff report, there is a table called Audit Report, and in that table, cybersecurity assessment and buildings design and construction are rated as not applicable. So, knowing the fact that the cybersecurity is a high risk, what's the reason for not rating these two reports in the staff report? And particularly the cybersecurity assessment.
I'm sorry, which report are you referring to?
So in the report, there's a table there that I summarizes all the reports, and it has got a rating there, like a recommended, completed. There's a rating there. The second column shows a rating.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, this is the MAP report. Well, last year we presented a cybersecurity assessment to Audit Committee in November. And there were a number of findings, and all those issues have been bundled into a map. IT is working on a long-term plan to address all the issues, and we're tracking them through the map process. So the NA next to the building design and construction, the audit wasn't conducted, and we provided some guidance, and we provided a memo to Audit Committee, and we will return to the audit to complete it. Cybersecurity, because it was an assessment and not an audit, we didn't rate it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now, Councillor Bowman.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. There was a note there as well for under completed audits and real estate management. The audit memo was issued. A full audit was deferred to 2021. Do we have access? What was the audit memo that was issued? And we're already 4 months into 2021. What's the plan for that?
So the audit memo was presented to committee, and I can't remember which month that was. I'm sorry, but it would be in the minutes. And Sorry, what's the second part of your question?
The full audit is deferred to 2021. We're already 4 months into 2021. What's the timeline on that now?
Oh, okay. It's deferred to where it's on the schedule for towards the Q3 of this year.
Q3. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bowman. I do have questions myself, so I'll ask that I move that the chair be heard.
Sure.
Thank you, Councillor Bowman. So to acting internal auditor, so going back to a couple of the questions specifically around the HR complaints. So we have 28 complaints, is that correct?
There were 28 complaints, all of a similar nature, that were given to a third party to assess.
Now, so as the chair of audit, I was never notified about this process, and you had just stated that the process, which means that you don't share this information with the audit committee. Who approved this process?
It's the process has been in place since 2019, I believe.
Now, what were the findings? You're saying that so the complaints were against management, and then management, they receive information from the lawyer who says they have recommendations, and then management decides to close it, and none of this is brought forward to the audit committee.
You know, this is yeah, I'm sorry. It's just what the it's what's described in the process. So
now,
following the process.
Okay, but who implemented that process? As far as I've been on the audit committee as the chair, I've never had once the process be approved that the fraud investigation is undertaken, and then management take it upon themselves to not go forward with the investigation based on what some lawyer who a third party. So I guess, can we get a copy of that report for the audit committee and we can reveal it in camera? Is there an actual report for us to look at?
I received a summary, so I can include it in my audit notes. I didn't ask for the full report because it wasn't relevant to the actual to determining whether or not this was fraud. In the end, it wasn't a case of fraud. It was HR management issue, and like I said, I got sufficient evidence to say that the case was assessed, and the rest of the report resides with human resources.
Yeah, and I feel for you because I know you're in an acting role, so I won't. I do see that the HR director wants to respond, but I will hand it over to the HR director. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So I can't speak to the process in internal audit, but definitely can talk about the 26 anonymous complaints and just some context around it. So the complaints, my understanding, were submitted through the Clearview system from October 2019 to December 2020. And it happened in two phases where 11 to 13 complaints, I believe, came in 2019, and another 11 to 13 complaints came in fall of 2020. So the first set of complaints and the second set of complaints are very similar, where there were some individuals named with regards to their hiring process being questioned, along with some more general conversation or comments about the culture and context. So the leadership in 2019, which was the acting commissioner responsible for that portfolio and the acting HR director at the time, made the determination to pass it on to a third party, which actually specializes in investigations and reviews. They did not conduct an investigation because the complaints were anonymous and they determined that the allegations weren't clear enough. So they conducted what is called a review and not an investigation. So the difference between that is a review is much more about general feelings and experiences as compared to investigation that gives due process to the complainant to clarify their allegations and the respondent an opportunity to respond back to what is being alleged against them. The findings of that report were shared with the city, with the commissioner of that department and myself in March of 2020. And the recommendations in that have been in works being implemented with the current commissioner of that portfolio and the HR team. In addition to the review, which is the summary that Richard is talking about that he has a copy of, we do have a full report. And if the process allows and that's the will of the council, absolutely that can be shared with the group. One of the things about the hiring allegations about specific individuals that was investigated by internal audit and HR, and the allegations were not substantiated. That report also exists. The reports that came in fall of 2020 were again discussed with another external legal body, and the investigation was not done based on the lawyer's opinion that the then director of internal audit had reached out to these individuals, offering them an opportunity to come forward, to clarify who the complainant is, to clarify the allegations, but apparently between the lawyer and the internal audit director at that time, that there was no clarity of what the complaints are, the actual allegations, and no complainant wanted to come forward. Given that the work was already underway with the same recommendations from the review, an investigation did not take place.
Okay, so going back to my original question, so there's a couple of things that concern me. Why wasn't this brought to audit's attention? Why wasn't, as the chair of audit, why wasn't I not notified? One. Two, who was the lawyer that we sought? Who was the lawyer that prepared the report? And how was he chosen?
So the law firm at the first time, sorry, I'm just pulling that up right now. It's a firm that specializes in investigations that's called Workplace Investigation Law, LLP. And the lawyer's name is Monica Jeffrey, who conducted the review of all of these complaints that came in 2019. The second set was to Bernardi Law, LLP, and the lawyer's name is Allison Renton.
Okay, now going back to a review was done, not an investigation. So what type of review was given? Why weren't they investigated?
My understanding, based on conversations with the person who was the acting HR director at that time, along with the commissioner at that time, was because the complaint was nebulous, the allegations weren't clear, and there was no person coming forward as a complainant, that it disallowed an investigation to occur. Instead, a decision was that it would be an open conversation where over 60 people in that portfolio participated in interviews with Ms. Monica Jeffrey and provided insights about their experiences and opinions. It wasn't a fact-finding mission, which is what investigation would allow. It was a culmination of what are the general senses in terms of the feelings and experiences of the participants.
So again, going back, so who made the decision not to pursue this as an investigation? So you have a summary from a lawyer, and then the commissioner and the HR director take it upon themselves, or acting HR director, acting internal auditor, they made the decision upon themselves not to pursue this. So it was just closed.
Sorry, Chair, could you repeat your question?
Who made the decision not to pursue this? Why was just a review done, and why wasn't this not brought to our attention? So you're saying it was the former internal auditor, or commissioner in conjunction with the former acting HR director made the determination not to proceed with an investigation?
So to be clear, it wasn't the last former internal auditor, internal audit director. This was a decision that was made in 2019 December. So the leadership at that time would have made that decision. I can't comment on why this was not brought to the audit committee's attention.
Okay, so in 2019, the HR director, they decide to not pursue this, and the commissioner made the determination not to pursue this investigation. And
they made the determination to do a review. I would assume it was in consultation with the external body, which is Monica Jeffrey's firm.
Okay, and they made the determination not to share this with audit.
I don't know that. Sorry, Chair. Can't comment on that.
Okay, and I guess to our internal auditor, again, this process, I would like at the next committee meeting, and I'll move a motion that you bring forward this process for us to understand what this process is. And this speaks to, again, the independence of the audit committee and how management are making determinations and decisions on an investigation that is investigating essentially themselves. And this has been at the crux and at the center of a lot of these issues where we have at the audit committee. And frankly, this is just another example of, you know, who said what, who made the determination. And I still feel that there's part of the story that has not come out. And I still do feel that people made decisions without authorization and without coming to the audit committee. And this is not for you to answer again. I know you're in an acting role. You've been put in a tough position, but I do feel, and I'm not sure if anyone else can comment for management, but this determination of 28 complaints and the summary which was provided by an outside source, and not once that this comes to our audit committee is very concerning. I do see there's other questions, so I will go back to some of the questions and I'll come back. So I'll go to Councillor Bowman.
Thank you very much. Through you, Mr. Chair. If Sandeep's still there, I just have a couple of questions about some of the things she said. December of 2019, that's when you said that these were brought forward and closed and not disclosed. Is that correct?
My understanding is the complaints came between November and December of 2019. December 2019, a decision was made to conduct a review and not an investigation. The report was received in March of 2020.
Okay, who was the head of audit in December 2019?
There would have been an acting director at the time.
Yeah, that's what I thought, because there was a change there, I think, in the summer of 2019. Is that correct?
I thought it was more October, November, but
okay. Either way, there was a change there. So, my question is that up until June 16th of 2020, when we had the internal audit charter brought forward to this committee, we were still working under the old audit charter that was represented to us on March 19th, 2019. And under that charter, the head of audit still reported directly to Committee of Council. So I don't understand why these reports did not come to Committee of Council, because we were still working under the old audit charter, and that audit charter clearly says that all reports go directly through the audit committee. Now, I know, Sandeep, you probably won't be able to answer that, but because you were just in a temporary role, but why? I just don't understand why we were going against the internal audit charter by just not bringing these forward to this committee. Does anyone have an answer?
For the chair, David here, I think that those questions are probably better answered at the Auditor General Model report discussion, so happy to further have the conversation there. And I think it rests to a large extent that the definition of the term report. Certainly the audit reports are directly submitted to committee. So I think we can probably clarify what report means. That would be helpful to guide the discussion. With respect to, in this particular example, why wasn't it reported to audit committee? Well, it is through this report that you have today in terms of the fraud hotline data and status. And so
David, it's being reported to us 8 months after it happened, after they were closed, after there was no action taken by a legal firm that the audit committee didn't even know was involved. Is that what you're saying?
If I may, Councillor, through the chair, I understand that there are quarterly updates as well. That this is an annual report, so this would have been reported quarterly. And so again, as I understand it, this particular instance was determined not to be fraud related, but rather some nebulous HR management issues with some recommendations that were starting to be implemented by the relevant management team in Public Works, and it has been reported certainly at a high level through the regular reporting of quarterly reports. Now, I am happy to have the discussion to clarify what the process is, for everybody's sake, and I see that the chair has put a motion forward to do just that.
Okay, but am I wrong? Am I wrong in saying that December 2019, we were still working under the old charter before the charter was changed in June of 2020?
So with respect to which audit charter was in effect, I'm not sure, how that affects this particular discussion.
Well, it affects this particular discussion, David, because we're talking about 28 complaints. We're not talking about 2-3 nebulous complaints. We're talking about 28 complaints that were referred to a third party without coming to this audit committee, as is specified in the audit charter that we were working under there. And I'm happy to have this conversation later too, but this has everything to do with these particular 28 complaints and this committee and the how this committee works and what our reporting structure is. And that is not to be questioned. That is in the audit charter. The only question we have right now is, why wasn't this brought up? And we can talk about that anytime, but I will wait until the audit charter gets brought back up again. Thanks.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Through the chair. Yeah, again, as I understand it as well, that there was this was looked at and determined to be an HR matter. That could be something to do with it, but I'm happy to do a drill down. What happened, if there were any issues, how we can correct it moving forward. If there were any issues, I don't want to guess or get into various interpretations of previous iterations, but I'm happy to proceed to find out what happened and how can it be corrected if there are any corrections necessary. But I would say that I'm not sure that the intent is for audit committee to get into the granular detail of every complaint that comes in. In this case, 28, yes, but they were all about the same thing, regardless of the number. And perhaps that piece to examine this is a good idea for all parties.
Thank you. Okay, we go on to Member Jane.
Thank you, and through the chair, many of my comments have actually been addressed in the chair's comments and from Councillor Bowman. But I do wonder if we can propose an adjustment to the proposal here that we see in front of us. My concern is that if we believe that there needs to be an update to the process that would provide some additional visibility into reports and reviews and investigations that come out of the complaints, then we can update, perhaps we can update that process as well. And so my request would be that in addition to reviewing the current process, if staff can come to audit committee with an updated process for consideration that includes additional visibility for audit committee, whether that's in camera. I think we can find the right mechanism, but I would propose that instead of then kind of waiting for another set of meetings to take place before we can get to that step, that we can include that updated process within today's vote.
Okay, thank you, Member Jen. So duly noted by City Clerk. Anything else, Member Jen?
Nope, that's
okay.
it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Councillor Dillon.
Yeah, I'm just wondering. Sorry, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering if staff can speak about or speak to the complaints, any new complaints that came in last year.
I believe that would be to our acting internal auditor, Richard.
Through the chair. So the yearly report contains all the reports that were new reports that came from last year. She wants me to speak to the remaining.
I guess the question is what additional, and correct me if I'm wrong, Councillor Dillon, but what additional complaints have been for the year 2020? Because we were talking about 2019. Is that correct, Councillor Dillon?
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct.
So in the report, so we just discussed the 28 issues. There were 35 in total that were reported last year. Excluding the 28, there were 5 complaints that no action was taken after an initial assessment. One complaint was investigated by internal audit, and process improvements be made. And one complaint was closed due to insufficient information.
Sorry, I didn't catch the last part. You got cut out.
Oh, the 5th of the 5 new reports I was just talking about, the complaint was closed due to insufficient information.
So how many complaints total were there?
In 2020, there were 35 reports. 28 were all related to that issue we finished discussing. And the remaining 7 were, 5 were closed. 1 was investigated, and internal audit made recommendations to management. And finally, one complaint was closed due to insufficient information.
Right, in the 5 that you said were investigated, was the audit committee made aware of those?
No.
Oh, okay, is there a particular reason, or?
The process doesn't include reporting to audit committee.
Right.
So I can't speak to these particular cases, so they were last year, and I wasn't the acting director of internal audit at the time. But right now, I'm operating on the current process that's available to me, the SOP, and right. The SOP doesn't. The only reference to the audit in the SOP is that if there's a complaint made against the director of internal audit, eventually right. The CAO right. Audit committee.
Are you able to speak to the nature of the complaints that were made?
And the policy and SOP doesn't allow us to present that information, most particularly in an open session.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. No worries. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Dillon. Our next, I believe, is Member Ali.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think David, Richard has sort of explained the answer that I'm going to ask. My question is that could we get a report on the 28 compliance, a high-level report as to what are the findings, what actions were taken, and what corrective measures were introduced to make sure that this doesn't happen? So a high-level report could be brought forward to the next audit committee for an in-camera discussion.
So you're correct. I was through the chair. Yes, I was just addressing that question. Policy doesn't include reporting to audit committee. Or the process, yes, the SOP.
But that report to be specific to the 28 compliance, would that be possible to bring a report forward to audit committee, the next audit committee?
I wouldn't be able to bring that because the only information I have is in the fraud hotline system. If we want the business perspective, I wouldn't be able to address that.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Member Ali. Next is Councillor Santos.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Richard or any member of staff, would you know when the last quarterly report was on the fraud hotline? I remember in one of our committee meetings asking questions about the 28 complaints and asking pointed questions about the HR process and whether or not the fraud prevention hotline dealt with HR complaints, etc. So I don't believe this is the first time we're hearing of these 28 complaints, because I do remember asking questions about the 28 complaints and getting clarification from staff at that time. So I guess my question is, when was that last quarterly update given to council with that information?
Through the chair, Councillor Santos, we presented that report on February 23rd of this year. And those issues were discussed then as well.
Okay, so it's not the first time that we are discussing this particular process, because I remember myself asking this exact same questions that are being asked today, and getting clarification between what is reported on the fraud prevention hotline versus HR matters, which has its own stream of a complaint process. So I just wanted to clarify that this is not the first time that this committee is hearing of these various complaints. Thank you.
I think, Councillor Santos, just for your benefit, they're referring to the review. The review was done before the 28 complaints, and the review was not done of the 28 complaints. So I think that's where the clarification is, but we'll certainly make note of your question. We go now to Councillor Paleshi. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think that I was going to ask along the same lines as Councillor Santos, and then what you just mentioned, Chair Medeiros, with respect to the review of those 28 complaints. Can I just confirm Councillor Medeiros had stated that the review was done after that report came to council in February?
It was not.
Or it was not?
It was not. Just to clarify, Councillor Paleshi, the review, and staff can clarify this, the review which is stated was reference to other complaints. The 28 complaints as part of the 35 came after the review was given to staff, because that's in relation to 2019. The complaints we're talking about are from 2020. So I don't know the action's been taking place, and maybe the acting internal auditor can clarify that, if that's what you want to ask, Councillor Paleshi.
Please, thank you.
The 28 cases cited in the 2020 report were, and I'll need to pull up my notes to get the specific dates, were reviewed by that third party, and the report was submitted after the preparation of the yearly report.
Through the chair, may I?
I'm sorry, after the submission of the review. Sorry.
The report that came to February.
Yep.
To the February committee. Sandeep, you want to jump in?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Paleshi. Through the chair. So the review report that we're talking about is actually, the report is from March 2020. This report was based on the first 13 or so similar complaints that came in fall of 2019. However, the same reports or complaints that were remade with the same context and information in fall of 2020 were then addressed with yet another party, and no investigation was conducted because of this context of a review that already had been completed and the recommendations were in the works. Does that clarify the sequence? So there are two, it's a polarized two sets of complaints that came, 13 and 13.
Right, okay. And so the 28 complaints that are on the report today, is that considered to be a lot of complaints that we've received? Are they comparable to complaints that we've received in the past?
In terms of the fraud hotline, it's a much greater number that we would normally receive. I don't know in terms of HR complaints, but but from the fraud hotline perspective, it's a much greater number for one similar issue.
And I recall when we implemented the fraud hotline last term, it was Councilor Medeiros that asked for it to be a standing item on the agenda for us to continue to have those discussions around the hotline. But there was nothing ever coming. There wasn't any actual complaints until I guess much later on. So with the last review, then, how many complaints were on that annual report? How many complaints were on the 2019 annual report?
I don't have that information in front of me, but I'll get it for you and send it to you.
Okay, and I think that there's obviously that we need to try and strike some kind of balance. We need to keep the anonymity of the people that are calling in on the fraud hotline. So I don't know about the complaint reporting structure to the committee, but I understand the committee members' concerns around at least having the discussion of when these should be coming to, or the process around when they should be coming to audit. So I certainly support this this motion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Member Ali.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I stated at my first question, that I would like to express my concern to the fact that the new charter that was approved in September and also subsequently approved by the council overly compromise the independence of the internal audit, and the fact that the administrative responsibility as a functional responsibility is now tied with the CAO. It overly compromised, as I said. So that is something that I want to really put forward and record it as a concern that I'm raising in this committee.
Thank you very much, Member Ali. Councillor Singh.
Yeah, just two quick questions. The first is, when we talk about the number of complaints, are we certain it's different people, 18 different people, or can it be the same person complaining 18 times or 13 times? Yeah.
Through the chair, the hotline is completely anonymous. It's they can choose to disclose their name. Rarely does anyone disclose their name, so it's impossible to tell who's making the report.
Okay. And secondly, I guess it's to the chair. Given that we have acting internal auditors, do you have any sense of timelines when the positions will be going out? Because I think it's important that we get some stabilization here.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Singh. My understanding is once we decide on the report on the model, be it Auditor General, hybrid, or just remaining, I think from then Council will make the decision. City Clerk, is that correct? Or if you just want to provide the weigh in.
My apologies, Mr. Chair, I missed the question.
Just regarding when we are going to pursue hiring a new internal auditor, and I said that basically we're still going to vote on the model that we want to proceed with, be it an Auditor General or hybrid, and at that time, then we would proceed, if that's correct.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm not aware of the status of the hiring process, so I would defer that to the CAO or the Director of HR, whoever's leading that process. I don't know the recruitment process for that position.
Yeah, and the CAO just confirmed that it's correct. Councillor Singh, any further questions?
No, I just wanted to know timeline. It's good. I expect this conversation to wrap up by tomorrow, so I'd like to see the hiring go out ASAP. I think it's much needed. Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess move that the chair be heard.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Again, going back to our internal auditor or to the HR director. So the answer I received that, and just to clarify, because there seems to be a lot of confusion about quarterly reports and people referring to misinformation or assuming that this audit committee is not aware of reports and not reports. So just to be very crystal clear, in 2019, there were 13 complaints and a review was done based on 2019. The answer I heard from our HR director, and please correct me if I'm wrong, contextually based on that review of 2019, that was provided the guidance and information to what was perceived 2020. And my question being point blank, was the 2020 complaints investigated or was there a review? And you said that there was another company that did a review, but contextually the information, because they were similar to 2019, that was applied to 2020. So again, just so the English language can be very tricky, I want to be very clear. In 2019, there was a review done on complaints.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Chair. You are correct. The language is misleading here. When I say 2019 review, it's a formal process and activity that was completed by a third party over 3 months period with 60 plus employees from that portfolio. There was a documented report and a summary report that was created as a result of it, which had explicit recommendations both for the management and for HR. The review that I talk about in 2020 is a preliminary review when somebody is engaged to look at the matter and determine what next steps should happen. And that preliminary review in the context of the 2019 review, a determination was made to not proceed with an investigation.
Okay, and that determination was made by management?
Yes.
Okay, so...
in consultation with the lawyer.
So in consultation with the outside lawyer, and you remind us who the lawyer was?
Yes, Allison Renton from Bernardi Law.
Okay, from Bernardi Law. So it was determined amongst the lawyer and amongst yourself or management to not do the same thing you did in 2019 because the nature of the complaints were very similar as in 2019. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so I just want to be very accurate. So all the members of committee have the same information and understand the exact same thing. And I understand the nuances of the English language and who said what, and so we're being very specific. So again, it goes to, I guess, our concern from, and Member Ali has reiterated that several times as other members, and this is not specifically to you, HR Director, but the fact, whoever made that decision in 2020, it should have been this committee who made that decision. It was the auditor. At bare minimum, the chair and the vice chair should have been consulted. So we'll look at that process, and going forward, we will see what happens. But it really is problematic if management is making a decision on to investigate or not, because they're the ones who are being investigated. And that's kind of what seems to be the crunch of the concern. Okay, I see no further questions or comments. Thank you very much. So I do have a motion moved by Member Ali that the report titled Annual Report 2020 to the Audit Committee meeting of May 4th be received. And is there anyone opposed to this motion? Otherwise, your vote will count in the affirmative.
Mr. Chair, it's
Okay,
Peter. Member Zaman is listed to just make a comment.
Oh, my apologies. So I'll go to you, Member Zaman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just taking a look at the motions here. I did not see anything brought forward about the report from March 2020 to be shared with this committee, whether in camera or confidentially or otherwise. So I would probably move a motion here that report be shared with this committee as well.
Okay, so so duly noted. So that will be probably in camera, which is fine. So you're requesting the 2020 summary or initial findings by the lawyer regarding no action be further taken. That's correct, right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. So for our next audit committee meeting, if that report can be made available to audit members and maybe have the lawyer be there to walk us through, could be another suggestion, through the rationale and why the decision was made not to investigate it as in 2019. Okay, so I guess before we move on, Peter, should we have a vote on this?
Yes, Mr. Chair, all the four of the motions are not contradictory, so they could be taken as a package or they could be voted on individually. It's up to committee.
So I'll move that we take it as a package, and I would ask a recorded vote, please.
Members of committee, a recorded vote has been requested on the four motions as shown on the screen. All in favor, please indicate. Councillor Santos.
Yes.
Councillor Willens.
Yes.
Councillor Paleshi.
Yes.
Councillor Bowman.
Yes.
Councillor Singh.
Yes.
Councillor Dillon.
Yes.
Member Ali.
Yes.
Member Jane.
Yes.
Member Zaman.
Yes.
Chair Medeiros.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, that motion carries unanimously.
Thank you very much. Our next item is item 6.2, Corporate Fraud Prevention Hotline Update Q1 2021. I have questions from Councillor Bowman. Go ahead.
Thank you very much through you, Mr. Chair. First question is the table listed, the disposition.
My apologies, Mr. Chair and Councillor Bowman. This item was held by Member Ali.
I'm sorry.
Member Ali should be the first speaker.
Okay, my apologies. Member Ali, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question on this is the high-level summary in the report that summarizes the compliance received in Q1 2020. That has got two key areas of concerns: the hiring of unqualified professional and recruitment and hiring and practices. Are these still under review? And if it is under review, is a report expected to come to Audit Committee? And if the report is coming, is the report going to be reviewed by the CAO before it comes to the Audit Committee? And when the report is expected to the Audit Committee? And also, a third party is going to be engaged for the investigation of compliance?
Through the chair, I can't comment specifically. Again, the policy and the procedures are pretty clear on where I can take these reports. And at this point, they're still under review. And at this point, I'm considering getting a third party just to assess them. Once I have an understanding whether or not we can proceed with this, then I would present it to typically the process says I would report this to management. So there's again, this is the process that's currently in place. It would not. Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Richard. So, would there be any update to the Audit Committee?
The updates are very high level in nature, as you see here. Yes, we provide a update to the Audit Committee that would be at this level of detail.
Okay, so no further question. Thanks.
Thank you, Member Ali. Councillor Bowman.
Thank you very much through you, Mr. Chair. Question, the previous reports that we've got, they had the little chart there that you've got dates submitted, disposition, report method, report status. There was a change. There used to be a report category, and the report category had harm to people or embezzlement, fraud, unethical conduct. Why did we change that report?
During the, through the chair, back at the February 23rd Audit Committee, people had expressed the desire to see what the disposition of these issues were. Also, the category that's being shown is the category that was that the complainant set when the report was submitted. Very often, the result is that there was if it had initially been categorized as fraud, in the end result there was no fraud. So it created and I can go back, I can change this, of course, but I think it creates the wrong, in the end, it's not factual.
Okay, so we're, just so I understand, the review that we did on these found there was no fraud. Is that what you're saying, for instance?
So the ones that are closed, there was insufficient information, or I didn't, or I requested additional information and none was forthcoming. So they were simply closed, and there was no evidence of fraud.
Okay, so this report, and we do get this report every quarter, and I appreciate that. I still like to see that report category, because when a person makes a report and they're saying, I suspect fraud, is there any reason why we should not be listing that? If a person who makes a report sees these reports come out in our minutes of the meeting, and they don't see what they reported on there, the impression is that nothing was done with their particular complaint. So is there any way we can get that put back on there?
Through the chair, yes, I'll put it back in.
Okay, and now this was brought up just in the previous conversation too, because we were talking about the fraud hotline there. But you said we've had far more reports now than we had previous to March 19th, when we had, I think we had, the hotline has received a total of 18 reports since its opening July 4th, 2016.
Correct.
So we've had 30 more, approximately 30 more in 18 months than we had in the first year and a half, 2 years that we had the fraud hotline open. So is there any reason why we might be having these? Are you in a position to answer that? Why there would be so many more?
The bulk of that increase is due to the 28 cases that we talked about earlier that were investigated last year. So if you take those 28 out, we're averaging much lower. And in the past year and a half of the cases I've seen, only one, and it turned out to be more of a process problem, but only one could have been tied to finances. The rest of the reports were not tied to any kind of financial fraud or theft or that kind of activity.
Okay. And I just want to, yeah, sorry, Richard, I just want to follow up on that very quickly. To me, the descriptions of the reports from the fraud hotline are very, very different since 2019 than they were prior to that. And I've got the report here prior, 13 calls, and of those 13 calls, 8 of them were categorized as theft prior to that. And now we see, since then, we're getting conflict of interest, embezzlement, unethical conduct, manipulation of data, workplace harassment, unethical conduct, non-compliance with policy. These, to me, that's very serious. That, you know, I understand complaints of theft, and I understand that, and they can be looked at. But these are a whole different level of complaint, and I guess it's going to come up when we bring this back in a future meeting, how we look at these. But what concerns me is that we're just not getting complaints about this on the fraud hotline either. We're getting complaints about this on emails that are being sent to counselors anonymously. I don't know. There seems to be something wrong with our system when we encourage people to anonymously report these things, and they just seem to, like, every single one of these has been closed. Every single one of them. So have we created a system where, because every single complaint has been closed already, 28 of them, for instance, where people are just saying this is a waste of time and they're not going to do it?
Through the chair. It's a very good question. Unfortunately, I don't have a good answer. I haven't done that assessment. I do agree that we need to look at our own processes and see how these issues are handled. There are cases that come in that aren't, that the fraud, the process isn't well suited to address. And so it's time to look at the process and see what we can do to make it better and to channel these cases into more appropriate channels.
Okay, and Richard, by that, do you mean the ones that we've got as listed as undefined, for example?
I was just speaking in general.
Oh, okay, because I see some of them are undefined, and I thought, how can they be undefined? If there's a complaint, there's a complaint, but that makes sense what you're saying. Okay, well, I'll just leave it at that, and I don't know if anybody else is on the board, so thanks, Richard.
Thank you, Council. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Richard.
Oh, I just said thank you. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Councillor Bowman. Member Zaman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just have a quick question. When the discussion around the fraud hotline came up at the last audit committee meeting, I think at that time our contract with the third party that operates the fraud hotline that was up for renewal. So a decision was made at that time to extend that contract for 1 year. And in the meantime, to consider whether there were grounds for extending the hotline beyond just employees of the city, possibly to extending it to external vendors, as well as citizens there as well. There was some preliminary costing that was provided to us at the time in terms of, I think it was an additional $9,000. That would be the costs associated with extending the hotline to vendors and or citizens. But that was only the cost of the payment to the third party. There would obviously be additional resources required in terms of the intake of the possibly higher number of complaints that might come in. I think the internal audit office or management had undertaken to conduct that more fulsome analysis around what the costs and resources might be and come back with a recommendation there. So just checking in on the status of that recommendation, if that's still being undertaken or not, if that study is being undertaken or not.
Through the chair. So there's two questions. One, did we renew the license? And two, have we started the research? So yes, we've extended the license for another year. On the second question, we have started doing the review. We were looking to report sometime in September or November at the next two audit committees. In the meantime, of course, there's the consideration of the Auditor General model, and that could impact that assessment. So we'll definitely need to see where we go with the Auditor General model, but we have started doing that assessment. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Zaman. Any further questions?
Yeah, I was just going to ask. My assessment. Obviously, I'll defer to the internal audit executive here. I'm not sure I fully grasp why the consideration of an Auditor General model would slow down an assessment of the additional resources that might be required in terms of extending the hotline to external vendors as well. I'm just not quite making the connection there between the two, but nonetheless, I'm glad to hear that hasn't fallen off the table and that's still under consideration. There, I guess the only other question I have in terms of the hotline here is, and I know this was presented at some point a couple of years ago, at the beginning of this term of council. How are we marketing this hotline to citizens, not citizens, but employees of the city? How are they made aware of the availability of this hotline should they want to pursue any complaints here?
Through the chair.
Yep.
The information is available as an information card on our internal website. There was an extensive information campaign a few years ago when this process was started. In the last year or two, with changes in management, and then last year with the COVID-19 situation, that campaign has stalled. However, when this current situation is over, it would be think whoever's leading internal audit at that point it would be good to start up a campaign, an information campaign. Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment. I think it's important that we undertake sort of a marketing or awareness campaign around this hotline, and not just the hotline. There's another agenda item here as well, just in terms of whistleblower protections as well. I think that should be integrated within that sort of marketing or awareness campaign at some point in time. So I agree with that assessment. That's all I have, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bowman.
Sorry, just two more questions that have popped up for me. Richard, on the report that we're looking at, it says current situation. The following is a high-level summary of the complaints received in Q1 2022: non-compliance, hiring of unqualified personnel, recruitment and hiring practices. And then it says none of the reports were regarding any monetary fraud, misuse of city assets, and/or theft. From my way of thinking, any non-compliance with policy or procedure, hiring of unqualified personnel, and fraud in recruitment and hiring practices, that would all be misuse of city assets and taxpayer dollars, would it not?
Through the chair, I would agree with that assessment in that it's a misuse of assets. On the other hand, there's also a very specific legal definition of fraud, and it's pretty narrow. And perhaps one of the things we want to do when we review the processes, the process and the policy, is to more narrowly define, or more specifically define what fraud is. But right now, this is the framework that we're operating under. And of course, I do agree that any misuse of any unethical practices or unethical hiring practices are a waste of resources.
Okay, thank you. And under the corporate fraud prevention policy on page 5 of 8, it states the report of fraud goes to the CAO instead of this committee.
That's in the policy document?
Yeah, corporate fraud prevention policy, page 5 of 8.
In my day-to-day work with the fraud hotline, I've been following the SOP, and the SOPs doesn't specify the CAO in all circumstances. It depends on the nature and the department that's involved in the fraud.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bowman. As I see there's no further questions, may we move that the chair be heard?
Yes.
Thank you very much. So I guess to follow up on some of those questions, so to determine that you just remarked that the SOP is not clear, but it seems the de facto default goes to management, and it hasn't come to sort of our attention. And I will say, in context with, public knowledge that we've asked for investigations on certain practices and other issues which have been raised by a whistleblower, and then in conjunction with the recent media article regarding some issues in public works and employees feeling that there's nepotism and so on, there seems to be the idea, and being a former bureaucrat myself, if I'm sitting in their office or in the cubicle and I see what I've seen in these reports, constant inaction, meaning we have the investigation before, we have a review, we have all these other investigations, we're talking about raising awareness, I really wouldn't have confidence in what we're doing here. And I myself, as the chair of audit right now, am quite not only frustrated but embarrassed that some of these things, when we talk about harassment, when we talk about workplace, when we talk about other sort of allegations, there just seems to be lack of direction, and this by no means goes towards you, Richard, because again, I understand that you've been thrust into a role recently, which, so I just think it's a general comment for this committee to consider in our organization that it seems right now the SOP or policy, every single time there's allegations, there's reasons not to really do thorough investigation and have thorough actions items, which is not restoring confidence. And again, everyone needs due process, and a lot of these investigations do need to be held. I think what the issue seems to be is that there's a lot of decisions being made that have not come to this audit committee. So I'm very interested on the policy process coming back. And again, we have to reinforce the independence of the audit committee. Management should not determine or decide what gets investigated or not, because it's not their purview, and the purview should be of this audit committee based on its independence. Because I just feel, and I don't know how the other members, but as the chair, I'm frankly disappointed in my personal view of taking on my role, especially with our duty to our staff. And it just seems that there's a pattern occurring. And, so this idea that we have this fraud prevention hotline, if I'm someone sitting at my desk, there's no way I believe in this process. So I think that's a conversation that we have to have going forward. But I do appreciate, Richard, that you are new to this process, and it's just an aside. With that said, I do have I will ask that Councillor Singh move this report, Corporate Fraud Prevention Hotline Update Q1. And are there any objections to the motion being moved, which is to receive the Corporate Fraud Prevention Hotline Update Q1 2021? Is there anyone opposed to this motion? No? Okay, so we move on now to item 6.3. And City Clerk, I did the mistake of holding this item, and I would be glad to move this item, item 6.3, Status of Management Action Plans, unless anyone has any questions or comments. And I see none, so I will have Councillor Bowman move this report. My apologies. That the Status of Management Action Plans, March 31st, 2021, to the Audit Committee meeting of May 4th be received. Are there anyone that opposes this motion? No, so the motion carries. We now go to item 6.4, Whistleblower Information Report. And City Clerk, if you can remind me who held that item.
Councillor Singh, Mr. Chair.
Okay, go ahead, Councillor Singh.
Yeah, I had a question for staff. I was reading the report, and I noticed our peers, whether it's Region Appeal or City of Mississauga, they have whistleblower program policies. Both of them have policies. So what's the advantage of having a policy over, for example, say Hamilton, who has a bylaw about whistleblowers? Because I noticed they're the only municipality who actually has a bylaw, and Toronto, sorry, as well.
Through the chair, we actually discussed the different tools available for implementing whistleblower protection, and much has to do with the so for example, bylaws implementing a bylaw can be enforced by law. At the same time, a whistleblower, the policy has to be very specific and define possible penalties, and that implementing a policy would be less would require less. There's more flexibility in the report. There's also the view that when people look up something like whistleblower, they may be looking to see it tied to something like the code of conduct or something like that. So from a philosophical perspective, there's different opinions on this. To the specifics of bylaw or rather than policy, I'd have to defer that to somebody else. I do have to say that the City of Hamilton saw the whistleblower policy as the whistleblower bylaw as one of the three pillars that they rely on to run their audit program, internal audit program.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're a little bit different than that, but I do think at the bare minimum we need to start with the policy, given that even our colleagues in Mississauga and Region of Peel both have policies and we don't. So I know this is an information report and staff is looking at it, but I think a motion would be appropriate as well, that we direct staff to implement a whistleblower policy, and let's keep it aligned closely with our neighbors, Region of Peel and City of Mississauga, and let's get this done. So I'd like to move that, yeah, that's what I have to say. Thank you. I think it's important.
Thank you, Councillor Singh. Member Ali.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I see in the report that City indicated that a streamlined complaint process is necessary, and the corporate policy team is leading this initiative. So my question is that when is this to be completed? And again, the same question as to how and which method that is going to be brought back to the audit committee. So will it be brought back to audit committee for review and approval, or just an information report? So how the audit committee will be updated in terms of the initiative?
Through the chair, we can report back on the progress of the consolidation and revamping of the processes. We're simply involved in a consultative capacity. As to the estimated delivery date, I'd have to defer that to the policy group.
Hi, this is Isa from the policy group. Through you, Mr. Chair. We're currently working on identifying the gaps in the processes that we have consolidated. So there is some work that needs to be done. Once we have identified the gaps and made the necessary improvements, we will be able to bring a report forward with the progress of this work.
Through the chair.
Thank you, Chair. So, thank you, for the question.
Okay, thank you, Member Ali. So I do not see any further questions or comments.
Mr. Chair, can I get a recorded vote, Chair? Thank you. Sorry for interrupting you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. So we do have a motion moved by Councillor Singh. That the report title whistle.
My apologies.
Through the chair, this is Demir here. I just
City
have
Solicitor
a
would like to speak.
clarification question, if I may.
So the City Solicitor has a question
Yes.
to the Audit Committee?
It's a question related to the motion.
Okay, go ahead.
Through the chair, the direction as I'm reading it, and I ask because I often get asked questions about policies and helping drafting them. So there's the motion says the staff be directed to develop and draft a whistleblower policy. There's a little bit of an issue of terminology. I do want to point out that we do have whistleblower protections in our code of conduct. And when I look at what the City of Mississauga calls their whistleblower policy, it seems very similar to what we have in terms of our hotline. And so I was just, it might be worth clarifying what we're seeking here. And maybe it's some...
So when I look at the chart, right, City of Mississauga, there's a clear whistleblower program policy fraud. When I look at Region of Peel, there's whistleblower protection policy. At City of Brampton, there's 3 different things. I think a standalone policy is what I'm personally looking for, similarly to those 2 jurisdictions, instead of being, littered within another policy.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
No, thank you for asking. Appreciate it. It's good to clarify now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we do have a motion moved by Councillor Singh that the report titled Whistleblower Information Report to the Audit Committee meeting of May 4th be received and the staff be directed to develop a draft standalone whistleblower policy. And over to the City Clerk for a recorded vote, please.
All members in favor, please indicate. Councillor Santos.
Yes.
Councillor Willens is absent at the moment.
Oh, I'm back, Peter.
Oh,
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor. How do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Paleshi?
Yes.
Councillor Bowman?
Yes.
Councillor Singh?
Yes.
Councillor Dillon?
Yes.
Member Ali?
Yes.
Member Jane?
Yes.
Member Zaman?
Yes.
Chair Medeiros?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, that motion carries unanimously.
Thank you very much. Our next item now is employee benefits, and I believe it was myself, City Clerk, that held it.
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. I guess to our acting internal auditor, and I must confess, I premise this by, again, if you do not know, maybe someone can provide the information. I was briefed on this report prior to with our previous internal auditor, and I was shared a copy of the benefits report, and I understand the same copy was shared with the vice chair. Again, I'm not sure if the vice chair would want to comment or not, and it was shared with legal as well. The report that we received today, that we're considering today, has been substantially changed from that report that I received and in which I'm in possession. And again, you know, not to raise, certainly I do have some concerns because, but I'm not going to raise accusations, but maybe can you inform me on why the report was changed, who gave authorization or direction to change this report? And I do have questions specific to the report, but just why do we have a different report in front of us?
Through the chair, and thank you for the question. To be completely honest, I wasn't aware that a copy of this had been sent to yourself and to the vice chair. Frankly, there were some of the findings that I could not defend, just when I understand the business context and the issues around it. Also, the report mentioned third-party entities by name. It's not usually the practice to do that in an audit report. And the scope of the audit report really was over management controls on HR benefits audit, and some of them were, a lot of the findings were framed in context of our service provider. Now, had I known this had been presented to yourselves, I would have approached you and talked to you about it first. So that is my error. But that's basically why I did the changes.
Yeah, again, and I would never assume that you would have known about it. But when we walked through the benefit report, when we were being briefed, and again, only after the fact, comparing to the original report, did I suddenly realize that there was a significant change. So were you part of the process of changing the report?
I changed the report, yeah. Again,
Okay.
I do have to stand up in front of Audit Committee and the public to speak to the report, so I needed to be comfortable with the wording and the framing of the report.
Okay, so I see we do have questions, and after I'll ask further questions after. So first to Member Ali, go ahead.
I don't have further questions on that, Chair.
Oh, okay, my apologies. Member Jane?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to raise the finding on the overbilling, and I was glad to see that we had detected that through the audit process, and that we are seeking to recoup that loss. My question was, in a case where maybe there was a gap in how we compared what we should have been billed with what we were actually billed, is that a finding that we can kind of further generalize beyond the specific scope of this audit, which is to say, if there's instances where maybe that gap exists in other parts of the organization, is there a way for us to issue guidance or for us to kind of not necessarily have to wait to find this, but to take this finding and apply it more broadly than this audit. And I note that in the reconciliation, but also in the management response here to add the reviewer and approver information along with dates to the record here.
Through the chair, most certainly that's something we could pull together. Actually, I did provide a bit of guidance on that in the whistleblower policy, and yeah, this could be an information communication to people what to expect in an audit and what we're looking to see.
Okay, yeah, that would be great, Richard. I think that to the extent that we can learn from the audits that we have and apply them broadly, I would support that. So thank you.
Thank you, Member Jane. As I see no further questions, I do have some follow-up questions about the report. So I will move that the chair be heard.
Yes.
Thank you very much. So Richard, in terms of our potential losses, I didn't see, can you speak to what it has in terms of analysis has been put forward in terms of the loss or the losses that the city has incurred as a result? My second question was, have you had an opportunity to speak with the third party provider regarding the benefits, and what did they sort of explain to you and comment to you?
All right, you're referring to the oversight of plan changes, or just in general?
Well, okay, first, can you speak to me what potential financial impact has that had on the city, and how long has this gone from the lack of oversight, and you know, what losses are we talking about from the city in terms of the benefits? What was the previous losses, and what analysis do you have regarding it?
The 2.4 million was discovered by the benefits provider themselves. They did an internal analysis, and they determined that there was another that was the amount that we were owing. There were 4 plan changes made over 4 years that were to save us money, and at each point there was a failure in the system to actually complete the change. So for that period of time, we were overbilled. Speaking to the accuracy of it, we don't have access to the data to verify it. And in terms of, there's nothing to indicate that that it's.
So I again,
yeah.
And I know it's not your area. I know we're talking about, I believe this would be an HR. So to find 2.4 million, and if the service provider in this case, they did their own internal analysis, from our process, do we not have staff people? So this happened 4 times that we overpaid. And we're talking about 2.4 million. Was it not, you know, or do we have the capacity in HR? Did staff not do their job? Did staff not understand what they're doing? Is the right qualified people to do the job? Was there a rationale reason why? Because it just didn't happen once, it happened 4 times. And we're talking about $2.4 million that thankfully that this service provider flagged it for us. So in terms of, you know, your findings, or in terms of recommendations, what recommendations would have come forward? And this is also a reminder, because I think Brampton taxpayers, if to hear that $2.4 million was mismanaged this way, they certainly would want to know, what are we doing about it to ensure this doesn't happen again?
Well, the management response was that they would work with the current benefits consultant to put in processes to monitor the output after we've made these kinds of significant changes, to make sure that we're realizing the benefits of that change. That was a step that I see was missing in the past, and management is committed to putting that process in. to prevent this from happening again in the future.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Now, in terms of one of the comments that you made, that the service provider made that determination, but we can't verify the data because they won't share the information with us. Is that correct?
I don't have that information with me offhand. I'd have to get that because they did a very detailed analysis and they brought in a third party. So I'd like to add that Manulife took complete ownership of the mistake. They provided the city with an apology. So there was nothing hidden. There was nothing. They took full ownership of this. So I commend them for that because that's a pretty big mistake to own up to.
So with other service providers, do we have similar process, or are we going to apply this, because this is not our only service provider, but with other service providers, as a result of what happened here, is this just a question of specifically with this service provider, or is this a practice that needs to be tightened across dealing with all service providers?
Through the chair, in my experience so far, the answer to that is yes. I was taught as an auditor that managers responsible for their internal controls, and part of that responsibility is to ensure that changes like this that have a revenue impact, that we're realizing the benefits of those changes. So I would agree that it's something that should be looked at across the board.
Okay, thank you very much. I do see that the HR director would like to speak. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So to the question that you've asked, absolutely, and thank you, Richard, for providing the context. So this change, I think it's valuable to kind of go back and talk about when it started, which was 2016, 2017, when the city moved to a voluntary generic program. All the eligible employees, which is across our non-union, well, basically our non-union and the other three union groups. This change, in terms of when change happens through collective bargaining, the way management keeps control is by checking that what was decided at bargaining has actually been implemented as a confirmation from the vendor. So we have that confirmation. The benefits consultant at the time also does additional layer of review, and they also have the confirmation that it occurred. However, as Richard mentioned, Manulife acknowledges that it was a human error that certain price files for those groups were not turned on. And Richard and I and the rest of HR team has discussed, is it humanly possible for anyone in the corporation to have that oversight? No, the only thing we can do is put controls in, and the controls that we have access to indicated that there was no error. So one of the things that we have discussed with Manulife is a partnership of greater vigilance in their auditing processes, which the detailed audit, the frequency of how often it happens, and sharing of information to make sure that what is reflected on the agreement is actually what is practiced by the vendor. And the monies, yes, they are over 4 years, between May 2016 to June 2020. And the financial impact of the 2.4 million has been returned back to the city. And one of our commitments is to make sure that we continue to have that conversation, and with our new benefits consultant, that's part of our agreement with them, to make sure that the future contracts have that access and control available to the city to have more information in terms of what is being done to implement the plans that we have put in place.
Now, again, my question to the internal auditor, is this specific to this service provider, or do we suspect that this may be happening with other service providers?
I don't have evidence to say that it is happening, but we do encounter lack of management oversight, many audits, and this should be something that people are aware of, that management should build in controls into their processes to make sure that whatever changes they've negotiated is reflected in the outcome. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. No further questions. So I do have a motion moved by Member Jane that the report titled HR Employee Benefits Audit to the Audit Committee meeting of May 4th be received. Is there anyone opposed to this motion? No? Okay, so our next item is 7.1, and we've dealt with that already. And now we move on to new business, item 8.1, analysis of adopting an Auditor General model. The item was considered at the April 28th Committee of Council meeting, and committee referred this to the report to the Audit Committee for any further consideration. So let me go to the board. I do have Councillor Bowman. Councillor Bowman, you're up.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, that was for the last item, but we voted on it prior, so don't worry about it.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'll go now to Councillor Singh regarding, again, we are on item 8.1. In this matter was referred from the Committee of Council regarding analysis of adopting an Auditor General model. Councillor Singh.
Yeah, and thank you, Councillor Medeiros. And we had referred this to the Audit Committee. I know, especially our citizen members can't, the motion can't be put on as discussed by the clerk, but I was intrigued in getting feedback from our citizen members to take to tomorrow's council meeting. So I'd love to hear their input. I did my own research because we always come back to the reporting structure, and I saw some of the emails also sent by staff, which I think will be or are going to be added to this report as well. And so there, it seems like almost every municipality has at least the administrative function of internal audit report to the CAO or the commissioner. Actually, I wasn't able to find one. I thought Hamilton might have it completely independent because they have a hybrid model, but even there in their charter, the administrative functions roll through the CAO. So I think getting to the crux of the issue, it's more about just the reports going through the CAO. So I just wanted to hear, I guess, where that line should be drawn, so we can look at, bringing it up tomorrow and making sure all parties are satisfied with the direction we choose to go to. So yeah, I'll leave it to the particularly interested in hearing from our citizens, so that their views are incorporated tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Singh. Member Zaman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councillor Singh, for setting up that discussion as well. I can start off the discussions here, and then others can speak their mind as well. I think from my perspective, I'm glad that this agenda item is up for discussion here. Given some of the discussions that we've already had at today's meeting, and given some of the recent events at the city as well, I think the consideration of a move towards an Auditor General model is timely. My personal views, I want to be very, very clear here. I do not think the current internal model, with its recently changed terms of reference, with its recently changed charter, I do not think it works, and it does not make sense to me. I think right now what we have is an internal audit function that is reporting both administratively and functionally to the CAO here, who is in charge of the very department, i.e. city management, which internal audit is meant to audit. Currently, we have the hiring, firing, compensation decisions relating to the internal audit function in the hands of, unilaterally in the hands of the CAO, who again leads the very department, i.e. city management, that internal audit is meant to audit. In essence, what we're talking about is that internal audit is now a member of staff rather than an independent body, and there is absolutely no independence here. And if anybody knows anything about audit, it's that independence is a cornerstone of any audit function, right? So the current function doesn't make sense to me. I would go back to Councillor Singh's comments earlier just to set this up as well. When it comes to sort of a benchmarking exercise, I don't think there's any comparable municipality out there where the CAO has such control over the internal audit function as is currently allowed here at the City of Brampton, where both the functional and administrative reporting and the appointment, removal, setting the compensation, all those powers around the internal audit function reside with the CAO. Typically, you do see perhaps administrative reporting to the CEO with some of the other municipalities, but even there, the idea is that the administrative reporting allows internal audit access to sufficient resources so they can conduct, fulsome, meaningful audits. That's the idea there. And then the functional reporting happens to either the council or, to the council through the audit committee, right? So there's no comparable here in terms of what the setup here is at the city of Brampton. Now, I do think, coming back to the agenda item here, I think the discussion of a move towards an auditor general model, I think it will sort of enhance and repair, move towards that model, whatever form that takes. I do think it will enhance and repair the independence of the audit function. So I think we're moving in the right direction with that consideration. The other question then comes up, what are the additional resources that would be required in terms of moving from our current model to an auditor general model? And I think as the report that's presented here, that also points out, I think that you could simply take many of the resources or all of the resources that are currently in the internal audit function, and you could move those over to an AG office there, right? There might be some transition costs, but I think those transition costs are really justified given the enhanced sort of independence of the audit function. So, I think to my mind, the question then becomes, which is the better sort of AG model? Is it a standalone model or is there a hybrid model? Practically speaking, from my perspective, I don't see much of a difference between the two models. I think the hybrid model makes it sound like perhaps it retains the best of both worlds. But if I'm thinking about it practically, if we go through point by point in the report, there's some points that were presented about the differences between the internal audit function and AG function. Practically speaking, in terms of real life, I don't see much of a difference here. So, I'll just close off here just by basically making the argument or putting forward a proposal that if we really wanted to future-proof sort of the independence and the function of the audit department here, I personally think we should go with a standalone EG model here, and that's what I'm personally in favor of. Nonetheless, whether we go with a hybrid model or a standalone, auditor general model, I think either of those is a step in the right direction, and I'd be supportive of such a move. Those would be my comments, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Member Zaman. Member Ali.
Thank you, Chair. I 100% echo what Member Zaman said, and 100% support that as well. Looking at the report and looking at all the other municipalities like City of Mississauga, Regional Peel, City of Vaughan, Burlington, Barrie, and all that, it clearly identifies that the functionally the audit committee, the internal audit report to audit committee, only in City of Brampton, it is administratively to the CAO, and all the reports will be coming to the audit committee quarterly. So it didn't even say that whether it is functionally reporting, but it's implied to the fact that it is also functionally reporting. And also the revised charter that was approved in September subsequently by the council last year is also supporting that. So as I said earlier on, this is overly compromising the internal audit function 100%, because the internal auditor has to be a standalone and ensuring the independence is there and for performing their duties and responsibilities without any fear or any force, and have the independency to bring the findings directly to the audit committee. And that is overly compromised right now. And knowing the fact that, all the media attention and all the accusations that is coming, it is timely that we need to really revisit the charter that we approved to make sure that that independence is restored. And by restoring the independence, there are two ways that we can do. One way is to go for an auditor general model, which is pretty much a standalone function directly reporting to the council through the audit committee, or even hybrid model. But as long as we ensure that the independency of the internal audit is being secured, and that gives the internal auditor the platform, the stage to perform their duties and functions, and confidently bring back the report to the audit committee. So I am in support of the auditor general model, but if the hybrid model is really ensuring the statement of the functional and independency, then I'm okay with that. So, but the fact that the current model is absolutely not helping and also overly compromising the independency. So I would support either an auditor general model or a hybrid model. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Singh.
Okay, no, I was going to ask for clarification, but I got clarification. So I think that's great feedback. Thank you to both members. And hopefully tomorrow, you feel like your voice is incorporated. I just thought it was important to hear you out fully, and appreciate you guys always, for bringing your perspective. It's very valuable. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Member Jane.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I appreciate the platform. I won't repeat everything that my fellow citizen members have said, but I just want to echo their comments and agree with the comments made. And that to me, the difference between the Auditor General model and the hybrid model, it's not very clear to me what those differences are in substance. And so, just for the sake of having a clean break and something that feels very clear, I would also support the Auditor General model over the hybrid model here as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The CEO, Councillor Bowman. Go ahead, Councillor Bowman.
No, I was going to suggest that we hear from the CAO, because when I was chatting earlier, he said he wanted to comment on this.
Okay, CAO Barrick, go ahead.
Great, thank you, Chair. I did want to clarify. It's important that we're all dealing with the same set of facts, and I know that there's a lot of notions that have been put out there in some of the commentary, both previous meeting today and I suspect in future as well. And I want to start by saying that this whole conversation has been, we've discussed this matter on multiple occasions, and we have the meeting, the reports and the minutes to validate and evidence that this discussion's come up, and staff have consistently provided the same advice over and over again, which is fine, and that's our job. We'll continue to do that. There was a reference to kind of the industry standard in terms of the internal audit reporting function and questions around its independence. And so we did a quality assurance review through KPMG that was provided to this committee and council last September. KPMG is here today once again to clarify the industry standard perspective in terms of which you saw a bit of analysis in the report that was emailed, or the item that was emailed, in terms of the other municipalities who have internal audit function, where the internal auditor reports to a CAO, a city manager, a commissioner, etc. And that's okay. Their independence is not, they don't have, no independence, as I think was referenced. There are mechanisms that are in place. So perhaps while I'm speaking, Nick may be able to confirm that aspect of it. And the other part, I think, where there's some confusion, we're all happy to get some clarity with respect to any quote-unquote hybrid version. From the legal perspective, and if committee and council recall, legal got involved to help clarify some of these issues in October 2019, whereas legal wasn't involved prior to that. So we do have that legal clarity, and that's important. And it's in essence this, legal is here as well and can speak to it further, that council really is in a position to pick a lane in terms of if council, committee and council would like to hire their own auditor, that's completely fine. But it should be done through the Auditor General model, which the Municipal Act allows. There's no real hybrid version where council hires the auditor, but it's still an internal audit function. And so maybe with that, I'll pass it to Nick on the industry standards, and then possibly here.
I got to intervene. I'm not sure if the KPMG analyst who Nick is, and I don't know the industry standard if KPMG is the authoritative measures to provide that answer, because there's a lot of companies that we can refer to. So I'm not sure. I'll leave it to members of committee to decide, but I don't know who this person is and what this person's function is and why we were not notified before, so this would go on the agenda.
Well, if I may, through the chair, so it's information that committee's already received, the quality assurance review that committee has received and adopted, and Nick from KPMG presented it in September. So some additional information was requested by some members of committee, which we have provided, and so KPMG is here to speak to that additional information that is provided upon request. If you don't think it's helpful, then I'm in your hands, of course. But in terms of clarifying both the leak and which Councillor Bowman has asked for some comments, there's those options if you wish.
I will leave it to members of committee if they want to ask specific questions, and that is fine. So unless you want to refer anything else, any other comment?
Of myself, no, that's fine, Chair, thank you.
Okay, so Member Zaman.
Mr. Chair, quick question here. So if I'm understanding the CEO's comments here correctly, KPMG came in and conducted some sort of review, and they green lighted the independence of the internal audit. If I'm understanding correctly, I think that's what the CEO was suggesting. Just wanted to get a sense of the timing of when this report came out. Was it prior to or after the charter changes that were made in September last year?
Would you like to ask directly to the KPMG? Apparently we have an employee from KPMG here.
It's just a matter of timing, right? But basically my question is, when KPMG was opining on the independence of the internal audit function, was that prior to the change in the charter, or was that, was their opinion on the structure in place after the change in the charter? It's just, that's a quick question in terms of timing. Whoever is the appropriate person to answer that.
Does anyone want to answer?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's Peter. I can answer that both the report on the internal charter and the report resulting from the KPMG review and the quality assurance review were both considered at the September 8th Audit Committee meeting of 2020.
So my sense is, as I hear that, my sense is, when KPMG came in and conducted the review and said, all is well and good in terms of independence, they were probably taking a look at it prior to the change in the charter. So that's when they were saying all is well and good in terms of independence. But now that the charter has changed, I think, there's a possibility, not to speak on KPMG's behalf, there's a possibility that if they came in today and conducted that review again, they may have a different opinion there. That's the only comment I'll make. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Santos. Okay, maybe you're having technical difficulties. I'll move to.
It's Councillor Santos. Sorry,
okay.
were you calling me? Thank you, through you,
Yeah.
Mr. Chair. I would like to actually get a refresher from KPMG since they are here. I do remember this particular report coming to Committee of Council. I remember asking questions for clarification about it, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm happy if we could hear from Nick. I do actually remember Nick and his name when he provided that presentation. If he could provide a refresher to committee in terms of the details of your report and findings, please.
Shall I start?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay, absolutely. So yeah, just to reiterate our findings. So there are various confirmations in place around independence. So at the time of our review, we did look back and see the ways in which independence was confirmed throughout the function. There are various confirmations that are received through the scoping that is done, where there's confirmation of the independence of internal audit. There's also just the inherent nature of internal audit and the Institute of Internal Audit standards that the Director of Internal Audit and the previous Directors of Internal Audit have had to sign up to and confirm as part of their kind of membership and role as directors. And that requires them to be independent and ensure that there is their reports are presented up to an audit committee. And of course, they have to have some form of responsibility through to management as well in terms of the requirements under the Municipal Act and other areas as well. So there are various kind of reporting lines that have to be kind of respected as well. And I think that there were comments made in the past around reports coming directly to audit committee without management seeing them. That would be highly unusual in my experience. I do think that management have to have the opportunity to comment on reports provide management responses and action plans in response to recommendations as well. So that there is very much a responsibility for management to review the findings and provide that commentary. But the Director of Internal Audit, based on the evidence that we saw at the time of our work, was reporting and providing their reports up to the Audit Committee for consideration. And they'd confirmed their independence and objectivity through various other means, through their reporting and other ways as well. So at the time of our work, that was very much what we saw.
Okay, Councillor Santos, any further questions?
Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Palashi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess it's good to get the feedback from the members. I came into this meeting feeling like tomorrow I'm going to be supporting a hybrid model. I still feel like I'm going to be supporting a hybrid model, and that's basically because I think that it gives us that opportunity of independence that that we did have, as I am one of, I think, Councillor Bowman and Councillor Willens are the only two members here that didn't support the change in the charter in the first place. And I think that it brings us back to essentially that, having the independence, but without the price tag that comes along with an Auditor General. So I think that I've heard that there isn't too much clarity around the differences between the two, and maybe this would be an opportunity for Peter then to, or Nick, I'm not sure which, to provide us with the difference between the two, so that there is clarity around that.
So through you, Mr. Chair, it's Peter. Perhaps I would defer to the CEO's office and the Ombudsman report, which does speak to some of the differences. And you may recall the presentation at Committee of Council last week and some of the slides. There were some slides that tried to set out the differences. Some of the differences between very high level between an Auditor General and an internal audit or non-Auditor General auditing function is independence, legislative independence, reporting directly to council, ability to summons and subpoena to gather information as part of investigative reviews, the duty of confidentiality. So those are some of the legislative parameters that are set out into the Municipal Act for an Auditor General, an independent Auditor General, and those do not necessarily come into play with an internal audit function.
And then Peter, the Hamilton model, and I can't remember who presented on it at council, but the Hamilton model, from my understanding, was it was a hybrid between the Auditor General and a Director of Internal Audit, where the auditor was independent from any reporting to any divisions in the city of Brampton. Their independence was around the reporting structure directly to council and essentially Audit Committee as well. And then utilizing the internal audit staff complement. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would defer to others in the CEO's office that did the review. I don't have in-depth knowledge of the Hamilton model.
Why don't I remember who
so through the chair, Miche is on as well. He may be able to answer that question through the chair.
Oh, right. Miche, you were the staff person that talked about this to committee last week, correct?
Good morning, members of committee. Through you, Chair, to Councillor Palashi. Good morning. Thank you for the question. I'd be happy to address it. The hybrid model that's being referenced in the City of Hamilton is a traditional internal auditor similar to City of Brampton, except that the City of Hamilton has provided additional powers to the Director of Internal Audit, which is called the City Auditor in Hamilton. Those additional powers are those powers to subpoena, those legal protections and the enshrined right to have access to all documentation. When I say enshrined, it's enshrined in City of Hamilton's Auditor General bylaw. From a reporting perspective, Councillor Paleshi, the city auditor slash Auditor General in Hamilton reports to the city manager administratively and functionally to the Audit, Finance, and Administration Committee, which in other words is the equivalent of your committee here in City of Brampton. I hope I've addressed your question, sir.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the way it was before with the auditor reporting administratively to the CAO before the charter change. So I think that's essentially what we want to get back to. I'm not convinced that an Auditor General and that high price tag that comes along with the Office of the Auditor General is essentially what the City of Brampton wants to go through. There's only the correct me if I'm wrong, Toronto and Ottawa are the only ones that have the Auditor General.
Through the chair to Councillor Paleshi, you're correct, sir. It is the City of Greater Sudbury, Ottawa, and Toronto that have a full Auditor General. In addition, City of Markham and Windsor have an Auditor General that they've outsourced to a third-party accounting or audit firm, both those being LLP and, MNP, LLP, and PricewaterhouseCoopers.
And then those models there, do they utilize the internal audit staff when they're conducting their audits?
Through the chair to Councillor Paleshi, no. Markham and Windsor, excuse me, let me rephrase that. Markham does not have an internal audit, full stop. They have this outsourced relationship to MNP, and they provide services at council's direction. Windsor is unique. Windsor has an outsourced internal audit function to PricewaterhouseCoopers, and they have an outsourced Auditor General, which is also PricewaterhouseCoopers. So they, in other words, Windsor has both services that are outsourced to PwC.
And what are those budgets at their yearly budgets for both Windsor and sorry, what was the other one that you had mentioned?
Councillor Paleshi, through the chair, it was City of Markham.
Right.
To answer your question, sir, City of Markham's 2020 budget for MNP to perform Auditor General services was $152,000. That's the annualized operating budget. And for City of Windsor, it was $300,000.
Wow, big difference. So Markham doesn't have any internal audit. Everything is outsourced.
Correct.
What's our budget for audit here at the city? Can anybody tell me that?
Through the chair to Councillor Paleshi, what I've identified from the publicly available council-approved operating budget, the answer is $1.223 million.
So I would like an understanding of why the difference. I'm sure that's not a discussion that we could have here, but maybe in the future we can have. Obviously, there's probably more work being done here at the city than in Markham. Unless you can answer that. Can you answer that question?
Certainly, I'll give it a try through the chair to Councillor Paleshi, and of course, maybe I could ask the acting director of internal audit to speak to this as well. But the brief answer is that City of Markham received one audit report. The City of Markham Council received one report from their outsourced Auditor General. The City of Brampton, your internal audit function, they've completed 13 audits, that's my understanding, in 2020, as well as performing a corporate fraud hotline. So yes, there's a larger budgetary impact, but it's really up to council's prerogative how much value, how much audit engagements or audit projects do you want. And of course, I defer that question to the acting director if there's anything further to add. Thank you.
No, thank you. And that's it's kind of a council question on how deep do we want that rabbit hole to go. So I guess just going back to, we want to be able to ensure that there's transparency in government. I'm still not convinced that a fully independent outside auditor brings that level of transparency, and that's why I was kind of hoping for the independence of an internal hybrid model with more powers. I think essentially is where I wanted to go, but I see that there's some other speakers. I'm looking, and I'm happy to yield. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Pelletier. Councillor Singh.
Yeah, just hearing all the comments, Mitchie, this is to you as well, and KPMG, I'd like your input. So just hearing the comments, it seems like the major concern, the crux of the issue is the hiring and firing with the CAO, and also the reporting with the CAO as well. And if we bring that to the Audit Committee, does that automatically mean we created Attorney General, or would that be just the internal auditor but with some additional powers given by the city?
Through the chair to the councillor, may you kindly repeat or restate your question? I apologize, I didn't fully understand it.
No problem. I'm saying if we bring the hiring and firing within this committee, the powers to this committee, and we also the reporting also goes to this committee as well for the final reports, are we automatically creating an AG, or are we just creating an internal auditor with some additional powers? And maybe that's to Peter too. Is that a really legislative change, or is that just a change we can enact as a city? Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, perhaps I'll start. If council wishes to establish an auditor general, there are steps it needs to take. It needs to appoint an auditor general. So there is an appointment bylaw that is required, and that bylaw may confer the responsibilities and authorities that are set out in the Municipal Act. So there are steps to establish an auditor general. So that person would then have the authority to act under the purview of the Municipal Act and act independently and report to council. If council doesn't do that, then really what we're talking about is the internal audit function.
Yeah, but with some additional powers that the city has given them.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and that may be an option council may wish to consider based on information that's just been explained in terms of how Hamilton operates.
Yeah. Okay, and then it's not I think to the hearing the citizens and some of the concerns, those two themes reoccur. So if that's just possible with a simple revisiting of the vote, and the citizens feel that would restore their confidence as well, that might just be the cleanest way forward. But I'll leave it up to them. I really want to hear their comments today, so thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Singh. Councillor Bowman.
Thank you very much, through you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate what Councillor Singh has just said, and he's correct, actually. So, Mashi, are you still there?
Mashi? Yes, sir, I am.
You had a chart, and it very specifically said Auditor Generals are responsible for these items. Internal Audit is responsible for those items. Do you have that there in front of you?
Through the chair to Councillor Bowman, yes, I have my report and presentation from last week at Committee of Council.
Could you read just that little, there's two little boxes, and it says responsibilities of an Auditor General versus responsibilities of an internal audit.
through the chair to Councillor Bowman, I believe you're referring to the presentation that was presented back to Committee of Council. The responsibilities over core mandate of an Auditor General are stewardship of public funds and value for money. That is explicitly defined in the Municipal Act. The core mandate of a typical internal audit function is around operational, compliance, and regulatory audits, as well as risk or internal control consulting. Councillor Bowman, is this the information that you're seeking?
That's exactly it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Because there's a lot of questions about the difference between an Auditor General and what an internal audit can do. There are a lot of functions that belong under an internal auditor that if we appoint an Auditor General, they will not be looking at. And that includes a lot of the daily things that go on. It includes a lot of the contracts. It includes employee. It includes HR. And that is the difference that we're looking at. And, you know, for the citizen members of the committee, back when we approved the original audit charter, and then it was changed in, I guess, September of 2020. We had exactly the hybrid model that everybody is talking about. It's exactly what we had. The auditor reported directly through this committee to City Council. Administratively, they reported to the CAO's office, only administratively. We also had the power to hire and fire the auditor, this committee, and the chair. That's the main difference. So, you know, and as Councillor Paleshi said, there was a few of us who fought against this back when it was presented to us, and we lost, and I mean that's democracy. But I just want for the citizen members, I just want to read you one thing, and I read some of this in council the other day. The internal audit charter that was presented to us and signed and was in effect until September 20 begins with, the purpose of the City of Brampton's Office of Internal Audit is to provide independent, objective assurance and consulting services designed to add value and improve the operations of the city. The mission of internal audit is to enhance and protect organizational value by providing risk-based and objective assurance, advice, and insight. Internal audit helps the city accomplish its objectives by bringing a systematic, disciplined approach to evaluate and improve the effectiveness of governance, risk management, and control processes. That was changed in 2020 to the primary purpose of internal audit is to serve the needs of the Chief Administrative Officer, Audit Committee, and senior management to meet their responsibilities for maintaining proper systems of internal controls and evaluate exposures to risk and strengthen management throughout the city. You can see it's significantly different. The other area that is significantly different is the internal audit function. And when we look at the internal audit functions, responsibilities, what was removed from the original charter that we had signed on to by this new charter was part of your functions. This was removed: reviewing and approving the audit budget, approving decisions regarding the appointment of the CAE, reviewing the adequacy of an authority, responsibilities, and functions of the OIA, including audit plans, budget, scope, and results of internal audits and management responses, reviewing and approving together with the CAO the performance of the CAE, and reviewing and approving decisions related to remuneration of the CAE. So you can see that in the new charter, the whole purpose of that new charter was to limit what the auditor could do and to totally change the reporting structure of where that report went. If we change this back, and I've talked about this before, if this gets changed back to the way it was, we are at the hybrid model, that was working well previous to this, and we have the oversight and the protection of this audit group getting direct report through the head of audit. You don't have to call it the Auditor General. We had this. So I just wanted you guys to know that, because this is part of history that you might not have been a part of, because this was in previous council. So just wanted to make that understood. Thanks. Oh, one more question. What do we pay KPMG to audit us? Who would know that?
Through the chair, it's Mark Medeiros. Thank you for the question, Councillor Bowman. I believe our budget for the external audit for KPMG is approximately 135,000, in that range.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Bowman. I believe our solicitor, Samir, you'd like to speak?
Yes, but I believe this CAO wanted to say something before that.
I don't have him on my board.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Chair, the CAO has his last comment was he wishes to speak on this item. Do you, 1209?
Oh, okay. Go ahead, CAO.
Thank you, Chair, and sorry for the chat function where there's a list that's it may be a little offset from the discussion. So I'll be very brief and certainly pass it back to the city solicitor. Just with respect to the clarification that the current audit charter has been hashed out, discussed, debated amongst audit committee, and has been discussed and approved, by the way, by audit committee, as well as discussed, debated, and approved by council. The changes that were brought forward were upon direction of audit committee and council, and so it is now council's audit charter. And so, I think, depending on where the conversation goes, certainly, I believe the clerk had advised reconsideration to open it, which is fine. Just wanted
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Plushie.
The CAO just said.
Oh, Councillor Bowman, sorry.
Yeah,
go ahead.
The CAO just said that all those changes were at the direction of the audit committee, and that's not true. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so noted. Go ahead, CAO.
Thank you. Yeah, so the direction is in the minutes and can be fact checked there. And the direction was to align the charter with the applicable legislation. And that's what was done in consultation with legal and brought back to committee and council. And so maybe that's a good opportunity for maybe, I know Samir wanted to speak to this as well. So I'll pass it to him from the legal component.
Thank you. Through the chair, I have to caveat my comments by saying I wasn't involved in the legal analysis that happened previously, but I've had an opportunity to look through it. And I don't want to get into the specifics of legal advice in open session for obvious reasons, but I have some general comments that I hope will be helpful. I feel like the terminology is very confusing. I echo the comments of some of the citizen members, if I understood them correctly, and please correct me if I didn't, but some of the comments were that the hybrid model isn't really a hybrid model. It's essentially the internal audit model. And I would agree with that, there was some, we may have modified the wording in an internal audit previously and given the impression of a hybrid model, but under the structure that's set out in the Municipal Act, it's essentially still an internal audit model. And, to the point about the confusion in terminology, if you look on the City of Hamilton website, and I know the Hamilton model has been referenced, if you look on the City of Hamilton website, they have a city auditor, and then they have a statement that says that the city auditor has been designated the auditor, the AG, for purposes of the Municipal Act, and they have a bylaw and they have a specific reference to the Municipal Act. So my suggestion to council would be to not get hung up on the terminology, but really look at what they're looking to achieve in terms of the model. And then based on that, you have two options in front of you, the internal audit model or the auditor general model. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Solicitor. Member Zaman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have a couple of questions here. Is Nick still on the phone from KPMG?
Yes, I am. I'm still here.
Hi, Nick. Thank you so much for being available here. I figured, since you're probably billing the city for your time here, we may as well take advantage of that time and ask a couple of questions here. So just a quick question. The report that you had issued around September, I believe it was last year, when you green-lighted the internal audit function in terms of their independence, did you take a look at the updated charter and the terms of reference that were changed subsequent to September 6th or September 8th, thereabouts? Was that part of your review?
Our report was dated August 14th, and we gave a partially conforms rating to independence and objectivity, and we noted a few recommendations there around creating a risk-based internal audit plan and the appointment of various committee members and things like that as well. So there were opportunities there for improvement. So yeah, I think that's certainly something that should be considered as well.
Okay, so the updated charter and the terms of reference that were changed in September were not part of your review when you gave the yellow score on your report. I guess the other question, since we have you here as an expert, my question would be, outside of the city of Brampton, in your experience, is it a good idea for an internal audit function to be reporting to the management, directly to the management of an organization? And in terms of best practices, is it a good idea for management to be able to make decisions around the hiring, firing, and setting the compensation of an internal audit function? Is that a good practice, and is that something you see very often or not?
I think it's difficult to say, because I think the Audit Committee still receives audit reports from the internal auditor. So from my perspective, if the internal auditor is acting in line with the internal audit standards, they should be providing their reports to the Audit Committee, and they should be confirming that they're free from any management bias or other influences that have occurred or that could have occurred within the organization, and they have the opportunity to report through to the Audit Committee any findings that they see fit. So from that perspective, as long as they're reporting to the Audit Committee and they're providing that confirmation on a routine basis, then I think it gets blurred across many different organizations. It really varies across industries in the municipal world, but I do see that it is something that is important to audit committees, and that you do get that confirmation through internal audit plans, reports, and other ways as well that you can seek that confirmation. And you should seek that comfort as well through the fact that that Director of Internal Audit is hopefully suitably qualified to perform their role and acting in line with the internal audit standards. So that really would be my summary of observations. I think there's many considerations that have to go into the different reporting lines, and internal audit has to have a reporting responsibility with management as well in order to be able to finalize their reports, provide management action plans against any of the recommendations that are raised. So there absolutely has to be a reporting line through management as well as to the Audit Committee.
Okay, so I didn't quite get a clear answer, but I can appreciate it's a very nuanced issue, and you may not be in a position to provide a clear answer. I'll ask the question more simply. Do you think independence is important for any audit function to be able to deliver on its mandate? Is independence a key cornerstone of any audit function or not?
It is, yes, absolutely, and that is defined in the internal audit standards.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
But can I just add as well, though, I do believe that if I'm right in my recollection of the appointment of the internal auditor, I believe that the chair and vice chair of the audit committee were involved in the interview process for the director of internal audit. I would like that fact checked, but that was my understanding. So I believe that there is some involvement of the audit committee in the appointment of the director of internal audit as well.
Okay, I think the chair and vice chair can speak on their own behalf in that regard, but I appreciate your comments there. Thank you very much, Nick. So just changing tact here a little bit, just in terms of the price tag question that's been raised earlier. I think it may have been Councillor Paleshi, I think, who raised that some questions around that. So, if I understand and if I read the report correctly, I think what the report seemed to suggest is that if we transition from an internal audit model to an auditor general model, we could essentially, and I think Maciek might be the right person perhaps to respond to this. Basically, the report said that we could take the resources that currently reside within the internal audit function and simply move those over to the auditor general model. There might be some transition costs associated with that transition, but the ongoing recurring sort of resources that are required will not be any more incremental under an AG model as opposed to an internal auditor model. Am I correct in that assumption there?
Could I just maybe comment on that point as well first? I would say the auditor general model is more focused on core value for money. I would say that internal auditors are also doing and can do value for money audits as well if they have the necessary qualifications and experience as well. So I have seen the dial being moved across the public sector, asking internal auditors to also perform value for money assessments. I do believe that the internal audit model also gives you the variety of other options and compliance and contract monitoring and activities and other audits that can be done as well. So I do think there are broader considerations to internal audit that can also incorporate value for money within the work that internal audit do as well. But I'll maybe pass over to Maciej to provide more commentary on that.
Sorry to interrupt, Maciek. If I can just follow up on that comment Nick made. I think that's a very interesting comment, and I think that was sort of the comment that Councillor Bowman was alluding to as well, in terms of perhaps saying maybe the internal audit function, if it is truly independent, perhaps provides more functionality, if that's the right word to use, than the auditor general model does. I think I would just push back on that argument a little bit, because as I take a look at the memo that was put forward in front of us there as well, that talks about that the auditor general's role is focused on quality of stewardship over public funds. When you describe it, Nick, or as I read that seems to put the auditor general's role purely in monetary terms, and it makes it seem like perhaps operational audits or compliance audits or regulatory audits that internal audit typically undertakes, those would not fall under the purview of the auditor general. I would almost argue that we have to interpret the auditor general's role more broadly when it comes to quality of stewardship over public funds. Why couldn't that include compliance audit? Why couldn't that include operational audits? Why couldn't that include regulatory audits? Is the auditor general prevented from undertaking those types of audits? And is that the reason why internal audit is superior, or can auditor general undertake those same types of audits that internal audit undertakes as well under its mandate to oversee quality of stewardship of public funds?
I personally never heard of an auditor general doing those kind of audits outside of their core value for money focus.
But there's nothing that prevents the auditor general from undertaking those types of audits under its oversight of stewardship of public funds, right?
I would have to defer to the city solicitor or legal for any legal view on that, because I cannot answer that question, I don't think.
Okay, that's fine. If
would you like legal to respond, Member Zaman?
Yeah, I mean, if I can get some clarity on, is the auditor general specifically prevented from undertaking those types of compliance audits, operational audits that internal audit typically would.
Through the chair, this is Samir here. Under the Municipal Act, that is not expressly precluded. So, but I don't know if that would be standard practice. But to answer the question, they're not prevented under the Act, as far as I know.
Okay, so that's what I think, what I was trying to get at, that the Auditor General isn't necessarily prevented from undertaking those types of audits that internal audit would, right? I'm just taking a look at the comparisons on page 164 and 165 of the report, of the agenda, that was put forward to us that compares the differences, right? So it says, the Auditor General, moving on from the very first bullet that talks about the mandate of the Auditor General versus internal audit, and also talks about the second bullet is Auditor General is appointed by council, whereas internal audit is hired by the CEO. Well, I think it's a good thing that, the person in that role is hired by council. So that's a tick mark to my mind for the Auditor General model. The Auditor General has the power to subpoena. Again, that's a good thing. I think that's a tick mark for the Auditor General model. The Auditor General is not required to be an employee. I personally don't think that's here or there. So to me, that's a wash. The Auditor General has legal protections in the case of civil proceedings. Again, I think that's a good thing and provides more independence to the Auditor General function as opposed to internal audit. And last but not least, I think one bullet point here that says, the Auditor General determines their own work plan, whereas the internal audit's work plan is approved by management and/or audit committee. And I think this is a bit of a red herring too, because if we're talking practically, even right now, more or less internal audit sets their own work plan, and that's, I've never seen anybody in this committee, say, no, you shouldn't undertake that work. So practically speaking, substantively speaking, I don't think there's much of a difference. So all this to say, I personally think the Auditor General model is probably a better model than the internal audit model. And that's what I would lean towards. And again, I would just make that comment about the resources as well. I think, we could simply transition all the costs and the resources under the current internal audit model to an AG office without any additional cost implication, other than perhaps some transition costs. But I think the increased independence justify those transition costs there. I'm taking up a lot of time here, so maybe I'll just last set of questions here, just relating to timing, if I can get some indication from somebody here. Let's say it sounds like, the Auditor General model is going to be on the table. Whether that gets approved or not is a separate question. But let's say if we were to move towards an Auditor General model, just trying to get a sense of how long that process might take. Now, I mean, there's going to be a number of steps there. First would be perhaps an approval by council, perhaps as early as tomorrow, drafting of rules and regulations, set up implementation of the AG office, recruitment and hiring. There's a number of steps that need to be undertaken. Do we have a sense of timing here? Whether we're looking at 3 months, 6 months, 1 year? And the reason, just to frame my question a bit better, the reason I asked that question is, if that transition to an AG model, if it were to get approved, takes an extended period of time, I'm just wondering, how do we establish the independence of the existing internal audit function in the meantime while that transition is taking place? And again, I think the mechanism for that is that the council, it goes back to council, and the council by a 2/3 majority vote can overturn or revert back to the charter that existed prior to September 2020. So just a question about timing, if anybody can give me an indication of how long that transition to an AG model might take. It's an open-ended question. There may not be a clear answer, but even a rough indication. Are we talking 3 months? Are we talking 3 years? How long might that take?
Through the chair to the committee member, I might shed some light on that. The City of Vancouver had recently, the Council of the City of Vancouver had recently approved a brand new Auditor General. The process from the council approval to the setting of the terms of reference to the recruiting of the new Vancouver Auditor General took about 12 months.
Okay, so we're looking at 12 months. So my recommendation in that regard would be ideally move towards an Auditor General model, but while that transition is taking place, I think the charter still needs to be reconsidered and rethought, and the council would be the appropriate body to take a look at that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've taken up a lot of time here. Thanks.
Thank you, Member Zaman. We go to Member Ali.
Thank you, Chair. I have one question to Nick, if Nick is available.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you for taking my question. So my question is very simple, Nick. If the hiring and firing and the remuneration of fixing the remuneration and reviewing the performance of the internal auditor is vested with the CEO, do you think that the internal auditor will be able to function, perform without any bias or without any fraud?
Yes, I think it is possible to do that. Yeah.
So the internal auditor can function knowing that there's no impact and there's no recommendation of bringing a report directly to committee that will have an impact to the CEO office or any other department. So they can function independently without any fear, even though the hiring and firing is vested with the CEO.
I would like to reiterate, I think the council appoint the CAO, so should be very comfortable with the CAO in position. The internal audit, I think that there is involvement of the committee in the appointment of the internal auditor. So I think there has been that involvement there, and I also believe that, you know, through the confirmations that were received through the Director of Internal Audit, there is the opportunity to receive that confirmation of independence and other reporting lines through to the committee as well, because their reports are provided, and per the requirements of the Institute of Internal Audit Standards, they have to be reporting factually, objectively, and provide their independence as well. So I think there is, I think the committee has and the council have to be comfortable with the decision that they would like and the charter that they would like. So I think if there are changes and tweaks that need to be made, then that needs to be done in consideration with, you know, the Municipal Act and other legal pieces that have to be considered as well. So really, it has to be up to the committee within and council within its own rights to make the decisions as to how they want to do it. But I do think it can be independent and objective still in that setup.
Thank you, Rick. So, yeah, it is, but it is always be a challenge. I don't think it will be that transparent for anyone to really act independently when everything is listed with the CEO. Thanks for the question. So, Councillor Bowman can clearly articulate it in his statement, and that what we lost since we changed the charter and got it approved in September, and I was one of the public appointment member which voted on the negative side, and that I was not supporting that motion. So we have compromised a lot, and what we need to do is that we need to reinstate the charter, the previous one, and that's what the major issue is right now. That independency is overly compromised with the change that happened, and that I don't want to go through the whole list that Council Bowman has gone through. So when we talk about the AG model, Auditor General model versus internal audit model or hybrid model, City of Toronto, with my understanding, have both models, and they are not just looking at the value for money; they're looking at everything. They're directly reporting to the council, whereas the internal audit is doing all the reviews of internal reviews of all the departments, policies, functions, and directly reporting to the CAO and making sure that each department is adhering to the policies approved by the bylaws approved by the council. So that model is working perfectly very well. But right now, what I'm understanding is that it may take a few months to get the Auditor General, and there's a cost associated with that, and it is council decision. But till then, my suggestion is that we have to really revert back to the charter before the one that we had before, and the change that happens in September, and that will give an assurance to the audit committee that the internal auditor is performing independently, and all the functions related to the internal auditor, that includes hiring, firing, and performance review, audit work plan, everything has to be brought back to the audit committee to reestablish the independence for the internal auditor to perform well. So that is my recommendation, and that's my suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Member Ali. I believe CAO, go ahead.
Sorry, Chair, that was with respect to responding earlier, so I'm good. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Councillor Santos.
Thank you through Mr. Chair, and this is, I guess, to Nick. If I can get some clarification, you had referenced that independence was partially in conformance. Can you explain that a little bit more in terms of what you meant by partially conforms?
Yes, absolutely. So basically, there's a 3-point scale that we use in terms of conformance to the standards. And so, we found that, in general, that there was there are various elements of independence that were confirmed throughout the internal audit process, through the planning stage, through scoping of individual audits, through reporting back to the audit committee, and other things as well. So from that, though, we did identify a couple of recommendations to improve independence and objectivity. And one of those was really around the risk-based approach for selecting the audits and making sure that audits were selected and identified within the audit plan, objectively, and that there was a true methodology for doing that. So that was really one of the key recommendations that were made at the point in time as well. So that meant then we were identifying that it partially conforms because we felt that was an important clarification to make through the planning process from an objectivity perspective.
Okay, thank you. And we did get, from what I recall, we updated the charter for a reason based on questions and comments regarding the alignment of the charter to what is in the Municipal Act, etc. Can somebody clarify, and whether that's KPMG or someone else, who recommended that we update the charter to align it accordingly?
Through the Chair, so that advice came from legal.
So it was a recommendation. Now it's all kind of coming back to me. And I have to be careful because I can't remember what was in camera, what was out of camera. But so legal asked us to update the charter. And what was the reason why? Is legal there to comment at the reason why they asked us, they recommended we update it?
So through the chair, I've looked at the legal opinion that was provided, and the guidance was that this so-called hybrid model was essentially still the internal audit model, but the wording of the charter created confusion and ambiguity about roles and was operationally confusing. And so the suggestion was to make it clear in line with what's in the Municipal Act.
Okay, thank you. And who was it that actually updated the charter itself? Like, who drafted it?
I don't know if legal held the pen on that or not, but I know that legal had provided some legal advice with respect to it.
Through the chair, I can confirm both the auditor at the time as well as legal reviewed it and updated it together. And in draft for committee's consideration.
Right, and I remember that the updated charter being presented on the same day that also Nick was there with this report that we're talking about now, with their value for money audit. And their recommendations. And I remember asking the question, which I will ask again, regarding the updated charter, and whether or not, and I asked KPMG, whether or not they felt that this now aligns with the actual Municipal Act and whether it does uphold the types of recommendations that they had made in their report. I remember asking that question. I'll pull it up in the minutes before tomorrow just so that I'm clear on it. But Nick, based on your recollection from that particular meeting and this updated charter, does that opinion still hold? Like, does this new charter now fulfill some of the recommendations, or does it meet the recommendations and issues that you identified in your audit?
Yeah, it does to some degree. I think there are a number of other recommendations that we made around the charter that required some updates and other things as well. So I don't think there was anything significant from our perspective on that. But I think there were a number of other minor edits as well that we'd suggested.
Okay, thank you. And then just for clarification, can somebody please confirm, did staff just decide to update the charter on their own, or from my recollection, they were provided direction to go and update it? Is that correct? Based on what the legal advice was, recommending to update the charter, to bring it back to committee. Is there on the record somewhere that it was direction given by committee and council to go and do that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, without giving away closed session deliberations, there was instruction given to staff in that regard.
And who gave that instruction?
The Audit Committee.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. As I see no further questions or comments, may I move that chair be heard? As we move towards, I do have some questions for you, Nick, but just picking on Councillor Santos, my recollection, the internal auditor, the previous internal auditor, not the previous one, the one before that, she was let go before the charter was completed. Is that correct? And that goes to, I guess the city clerk can confirm, but maybe legal?
So, Mr. Chair, I can just advise very high level, because if we're going to get into discussions regarding identifiable individuals, there may be a need to go into closed session, but there were departures in the fall of 2019, and the audit charter itself was updated and brought to the Audit Committee in September of 2020.
Yeah, in my recollection, just so, you know, and thank you, Councillor Santos, for bringing it, is that there were some discrepancies in the charter in which, previous to us changing it, which had certain functions and responsibilities via the internal auditor, which was changed after. But I do know that's an in-camera discussion, so we can certainly, I don't want to bring this up today, but certainly at council, there'll be a good opportunity to have a fulsome discussion on how the charter was changed, roles and responsibilities, for example, who has authority over hiring and firing of the internal auditor, and more than happy to go through those changes. I guess my question to you, Nick, when you talked about your experience, I guess you do this a lot, you work with a lot of municipalities and a lot of audit committees, and you've seen sort of the whole gambit, especially here in the GTA, I would assume.
Yes, yeah, I do work with a variety of municipalities as well as broader public sector organizations as well.
Okay, and the independence has been a lot of discussion around the independence, and I know that means a lot of things for different people. So specifically, for example, the fact that you're here with us now, is that a normal process that the chair of audit or the audit committee would have not been notified that we have a third-party expert providing comments on our internal audit charter?
I would find it hard to answer that question.
Okay.
I'm here to provide. I was requested to come to in case there were questions about the previous work that was done in September. And
who asked you to be here?
At the request of the CAO.
Okay, so I thank you for that. So regarding the independence, is it normal So previously to our internal auditor was let go, there was a report that I received as a final report, and the internal auditor was let go. And then the report which was presented today was completely 80% different. And we heard the acting internal auditor talk about why they made some changes because of their personal reference. Is it normal with a council that has publicly asked for investigations and referred police investigation, we have whistleblower. So within this context, do you not find for Brampton residents or taxpayers that independence becomes a crucial point? So when we talk about context, so your comment certainly as a professional, and you may not be able to comment, you know, certainly you speak to independence from your experience and what it should be on an org chart. So you as a professional, but the political landscape, which you may not want to answer, if that context was around it, would you not see the important function of the audit committee and its independence? Because that becomes central to the function of what the audit committee is supposed to do, which essentially is have Brampton residents believe everything is working well at City Hall.
The council has to determine, and this committee has to determine and recommend, you know, the best model for the city. So I think you have to take all of those considerations into account and make sure that you're doing what you believe is best for the great municipality of Brampton. So every situation is probably a little bit different, and there are many different considerations to take into account. So I think you have to find a model that is going to work for this council.
And thank you very much. And that's kind of my point, because when you're looking at one municipality where there aren't these issues, investigations, independence means a different thing to what it means here in Brampton. So I thank you very much, and not to put you on the hot spot, but certainly thank you for coming. I thank the CEO for bringing you forward. I think in the future, as a practice, the audit committee should be notified of any experts that come forward that we plan on bringing, because nor was this on an agenda, nor were we advised. So I do appreciate your time. So I do not see that there's any further questions or comments. I thank you, everybody, for the discussion, and I do have a motion moved by Member Zaman regarding do we need a motion, City Clerk? My apologies.
So through you, Mr. Chair, all there is presently is a motion for receipt, which was in the report. It sounds like comments have been provided that will be valuable to members of council for their debate tomorrow. And unless there is a motion that a member wishes to use to introduce, it would just be a motion for receipt on this discussion.
Okay, thank you. So we do have a motion moved by Member Zaman that the report titled Analysis of Adopting an Auditor General Model to the Committee of Council on April 28, 2021 be received. Is there anyone opposed to this motion? Okay, no. Question period. Councilor question period. Do any members of committee have any questions? No. Okay. Public question period. City Clerk, do we have any questions from the public?
Mr. Chair, I do not see any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Our next item is adjournment, and moved by Councillor Singh that the audit committee do now adjourn to meet again on September 28th at 9:30 a.m. or at the call of the chair. And I would say to members of committee, I do plan on calling a special meeting based on what comes out of tomorrow regarding our decision going forward. So I do think that we should meet one time before the summer again, but certainly I'm more than happy to solicit input, which I have done in the past, where I've called each member and spoken to each member to get their thoughts on the matter. So I thank you, everyone, and everyone stay safe and continue to practice social distancing and wear masks, and certainly go get your vaccine. Thank you very much. And